Good evening, everyone. Respected CA Dr. Devashish Mitra ji, President ICAI, CA Aniket Sunil Talati ji, Vice President ICAI, CA Charanjot Singh Nanda ji, Chairman Digital Accounting and Assurance Board, CA Dayanivas Sharma ji, Vice Chairman Digital Accounting and Assurance Board, Mr. HM Hinayak Bandara ji, President SAFA, and CA Nihar and Jambu Surya ji, Vice President SAFA, and our eminent speakers, Mr. Harish Duvaji and CA Uday Vaman Rao Kulkarni ji, and all the fellow members who have joined us for this webinar today. This is CA Shampoon Sharma, the moderator for today's session. Today we have a bit of a special session organized by the Digital Accounting and Assurance Board and hosted by SAFA Committee on Information Technology. So forensic audit is a language that uses numbers and symbols to communicate with people who speak different languages. The first step of discovering the truth is asking an honest question. And to guide us through this process, we have certain guidelines and standards, which brings me to the topic for today, which is overview of forensic accounting and investigation standards. Now, without further ado, I would like to invite CA Charanjot Singh Nanda ji for the welcoming session. CA Charanjot Singh Nanda sir is a Central Council member, ICAI, the chairman of Digital Accounting and Assurance Board, ICAI. He is also chairman of Internal Audit Standard Board, ICAI, chairman of Information Technology of South Asian Federation of Accountants, SAFA, and vice chairman of Banking, Financial Services and Insurance Committee, ICAI. He was a member of Quality Review Board set up by the Government of India, chairman of Committee of Internal Audit and Committee of Members in Industry, ICAI.
Mr. Sharma, we can conclude because
yes,
we are running short of time. I want to be
I request CA Charanjot Singh Nanda sir to please take over for welcoming remarks. Sir.
Thank you, Mr. Sharma, for your kind introduction.
Thank you, sir.
The Honorable President ICAI, CA Devashish Mitra ji, the Honorable President SAFA, Mr. Bhandara ji, the Vice President of SAFA, CA Nihar Jambu Surya ji, Vice President of ICAI, CA Aniket Talati ji, the co-chairman of this board, CA Dayanivas Sharma ji, and all SAFA country members, CA Harish Duvaji, the speaker, Mr. Kulkarni, the speaker, and all SAFA country office bearers, and all participants have come here to go home more enlightened. My heartiest salutation to all of you. Today's program has been created with keeping in mind certain number of things. There are total 3 sessions. The first session speaks of overarching documents and key concepts which are used by the Institute of Chartered Accountants of India's board, DAB, Digital Accounting and Assurance Board, in framing the forensic accounting standards. Session 2 of the program speaks on engagement management, which is SA 200, and executing assignments, which is number 300. And session 3 would speak of specialized areas, reporting quality, and more importantly, the systematic areas where we all have to venture in order to become efficient forensic accountants. Ladies and gentlemen, your institute, the Institute of Chartered Accountants of India, came out with 23 forensic standards outlining the entire concept of reporting and, more importantly, tabulating what has to be brought before the adjudicating authorities. I want to tell you that forensic is done all across the world, made by auditing or accounting, and there have been huge failures in terms of prosecution, and therefore they have thought it fit to create such standards that could create benchmarks and prosecution by the authorities, the relevant authorities, become easy. Now, why are these standards being promulgated? Number 1, these standards are designed to help the person who is conducting the forensic audit to master the subject matter. Very, very important to understand not only the legal aspects, but evidence also, admissibility of the evidence also. Second, it is to distinguish forensic from audit and create and bring awareness on the importance of legalities. The basic purpose of forensic accounting standards is to focus on key technical aspects and procedures which have to be followed while conducting the forensic audit. The purpose is to highlight importance of digital evidence and all the relevant propositions which have to be taken on board. And more importantly, the standards help to avoid pitfalls, especially in reporting. In reporting, there are a number of pitfalls which are ultimately creating a lot of problems once the matter goes for prosecution. Ladies and gentlemen, your institute, the Institute of Chartered Accountants of India, was the first to come out with guidance on remote audit way back on 30th March 2020 when the COVID had barely started. So to conclude, I would like to say that we need to clearly understand and agree the mandate received from the clients and stakeholders. We have to undertake a risk-based, well-planned, detailed-oriented execution of the assignment, thereby bringing results and trying to determine whether a fraud has actually been committed or not. We need to deploy the concepts of applying hypothesis and build a scenario of modus operandi. Digital evidence is unavoidable and using an expert is almost expected, and therefore digital evidence needs its due recognition. Findings may be subject to detailed cross-examination as the matters are subject to the court of law. And more importantly, expression of independent opinion, especially guilt and innocence, is not permitted, and therefore finding things and putting them at the parlance of the authorities which have appointed, made with the board or the audit committee. I want to thank the SAFA president who only on 21st called me to the board and emphasized that forensic standards need to be percolated to all SAFA countries. I'm thankful to the vice president, C. Nihar Jambusaria of SAFA, who supported us in all the initiatives. Thankful to the president, C. Debashish Mitra, and vice president, C. Aniket Talati, who always supported the board so that things which are relevant to promulgating the standards and putting them in the right perspective have always been encouraged. I have promised the SAFA board that the board DAB will hold 2 programs every month. One is on forensic standards and second is on technology. And I want to tell you that today is Friday. Next Friday to the next Friday, 15 days from now, we will hold a program on agile auditing, which is again upcoming area, which can be used by SAFA country members to educate themselves and use them to create greener pastures in their practice or employment areas. I'm really thankful to all, to the President, Vice President SAFA, to the President, Vice President ICAI, my co-chairman, all the dignitaries who have joined from all the SAFA countries who have helped us make this conference, make this seminar, make this webinar a great success. Thank you. Thank you so much. Over to Mr. Sampurn Sharma for further proceedings. Mr. Sharma, the dice is all yours now.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for such enriching words. I am very excited for this session, and I'm sure all the members who are a part of this webinar share a mutual feeling. To start off, we have among us a man of refined thought process, quick understanding, and a sharp vision, CA Aniket Sunil Talati ji, who has been elected as the Vice President of Institute of Chartered Accountants of India for the
Thank you. Thank you, sir.
2022-23. Sir, I would like to welcome respected for his strong organizational skills and deep insights in the affairs of the profession. He has contributed to the cause of profession from various professional.
Thank you. Thank you. I think Sampurji, no need for the entire introduction. Thankful to you for giving me this opportunity. A very good evening. Most respected, the Honorable President of the Institute, Sri Dr. Debashish Mitra ji, the President of SAFA, Mr. Bandara, the Vice President and past President of ICAI, Sri Nihar Jambusaria ji, Chairman of this very important board under whose aegis this program is being conducted, CSCS Nanda ji, Chairman of DAB, Vice Chairman Dayaneva Sharma ji, the speakers who are going to speak today, Harish ji, Uday ji, and all the participants from all SAFA countries. First of all, it's a matter of great pleasure for me to be here amidst you today when we are discussing a very important area in which I'm extremely proud to note that the Institute of Chartered Accountants of India has taken a great lead and develop unique forensic accounting and investigation standards. I think globally there is no other organization which has been able to come out with such a detailed set of standards for all the entities which are conducting forensic engagements. Forensics, as the chairman of DAB, Nandaji rightly mentioned, involves a lot of technique, involves a lot of digital evidence understanding, and is a very specialized area. And to make this more standardized so that the science and art, both of forensics, can be documented, the forensic accounting and investigation standards were proposed by DAB. I had the pleasure of being part of the study group, which initially drafted a lot of these documents and then eventually was approved by the council in 2021. And we are now well on our way to make them mandatory sometime next year. I think largely internationally, if you look at whatever forensic material is available, they are only guiding in terms of their documents and overreaching titles. But if you look at the forensic accounting investigation standards, besides the overreaching documents of the preface, the framework, and the basic principles, the standards have been codified in a very internationally acceptable format, where 100 series deals with key concepts, the 200 series deals with the engagement management of how you actually conduct the forensics. The 300 series is about the execution. The 400 talks about specialized areas. The 500 is on reporting, as we have SA 700 for our statutory audits. Similarly, for our forensic reports, the SA 500, and of course, a standard on quality control in the 600 series. Internationally benchmarked, but proudly developed in India. And I think it is through a conference and a event like this that both the ICI and SAFA are doing jointly, that we can take these standards not just in India, but spread them across the globe. And I'm confident that various SAFA countries will also adopt these standards, which a group of technical experts from India who have been working in the forensic domain for so many decades have prepared, and they themselves have vouched for the efficacy and the great nature in which these standards have come out with. I think internationally we've all seen India or other members of SAFA have always taken international standards and adopted them, maybe directly, or have made certain changes suitable to the local environment and then implemented those international standards. I think this is a matter of great pride that our domestic standards, made in India, made in SAFA countries, are now ready, will be implemented in India, and I'm confident that they will now be used by the world. We are seeing great traction in Africa, in North America, South America, who are all willing to look at these standards. And I'm sure as the adoption in India increases, not only SAFA countries, but also internationally, various other jurisdictions will adopt these forensic standards. So my compliments once again to the Digital Accounting and Assurance Board, the chairperson Nandaji, the vice chairman Dayaneva Sharma ji, and of course grateful to our president Debashish Mitra sir for giving us this opportunity to take these standards to the SAFA countries. And with both Mr. Bandara and Nihar Jambusaria ji being there at the help, I am sure these standards will be very well applied in all jurisdictions of SAFA. With this, I once again compliment SAFA and the DAB and wish all the participants a very, very happy learning. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for your kind words. Next up, I would like to request CA Nihar and Jambusaria ji to please share his knowledge light with us. Nihar, sir.
Thank you, Sharma ji. President SAFA, CA Henaike Bandara ji, President ICAI, CA Debashish Mitra ji, with whom I had the opportunity to work together, and also CA Aniket Talati, the Vice President of the Institute, the Chairman of this committee at SAFA, CA Charanjot Singh Nandaji, CA Dayanivas Sharma ji, and all those who are attending this webinar. In fact, it's a matter of great pleasure today that in SAFA seminars and webinars, we are coming together, sharing knowledge, and every country is eager to share the knowledge that each country has developed. And today is the time when last year In ICAI, this last year and the year before, these standards were developed and they were passed by the council. Huge efforts were put by Digital Accounting and Assurance Board. Very systematic efforts were made. A number of professionals were involved. And if I talk about the purpose of having these standards, let us look at the normal audit that we are conducting for so many years. And in spite of having exhaustive accounting standards, exhaustive auditing standards, at times the work of auditor is questioned and challenged. Forensic accounting and investigation is more detailed work. And here there is possibility that even stakeholders may look upon professionals with more and more expectations. And it is we who have to satisfy their expectations. So with a view to, in fact, there are two purposes behind developing these standards. Number one, to ensure that the quality of work that we do is uniformly good. And everybody who carries out forensic audit has a systematic approach when standards divided into 7 parts are available. 23 standards divided into 7 parts are available. Another purpose is if at times some disciplinary action arises, and if a member has followed these standards, he will have good defense in his favor that he has followed all the standards which were prescribed by the professional body, and it will give a lot of cushion to him in arguing his case. And today we cannot rule out disciplinary action in spite of the fact that a professional has done the work most efficiently. So these are the two purposes for which the Institute in the last 1 or 2 years thought that very systematic forensic accounting and investigation standards are necessary. Our speakers will, of course, bring out the unique features of these standards and share with you what has been developed. And suggestions are always most welcome. As Vice President mentioned, that these standards are developed by a SAFA country. So it has already looked into the prevailing circumstances and the prevailing practices in these countries. So that is an additional advantage. It is not coming from a forum which is not very much aligned to the interest of these countries. So with this expectation that the standards, when discussed today, will give a lot of insight into the forensic accounting investigation and some of the standards that the members need to maintain. Let me thank SAFA President for allowing ICAI to present these standards. Let me thank the chairman of this committee for taking up this effort to have this webinar today, and the president and vice president of ICAI, who agreed that let us share these standards with all SAFA countries. Thank you so much for inviting, and it was a pleasure talking with you.
Thank you, sir. Next up, sharing this web panel with us today, we have with us another celebrated personality, Mr. H.M. Hinayak Bandaraji, President SAFA. With great honor and pleasure, I would like to welcome Mr. H.M. Hinayak, sir, to please share his experience and learnings about the professional units.
Right. So, good evening to all of you. Thank you for the introduction.
Thank you.
Mr. Nihar Jambusarya, Vice President SAFA, Dr. Mitra, President ICA India, Mr. Sunil Kalati, Vice President, Mr. Singh Nanda, Chairman SAFA Committee on Information Technology, Mr. Sharma, Vice Chairman Digital Accounting and Assurance Board, eminent speakers, moderator, dear participants, ladies and gentlemen. At the outset, let me thank the Chairman SAFA Committee on Information Technology for organizing this webinar within a very short period and inviting me to address you all. One of the main objectives of the committee is to promote replication of forensic accounting and investigation standards as formulated by ICA India among SAFA member bodies. Therefore, I would like to thank Dr. Mitra, President ICA India, for the support extended to organize this awareness session for the benefit of the accounting fraternity in the South Asian region. I was very keen in meeting you when I visited India a couple of days ago to participate in the celebration of the SAPA Foundation Day and board meeting hosted by the Institute of Cost Accountant. I was told that you were out of New Delhi to attend some official meetings. Let me take this opportunity to thank Dr. Jai Kumar Batra, Permanent Secretary to the SAPA, and Mr. Mudit, Nodal Officer, for the warm welcome extended to me when I visited your institute. I had an extensive discussion with them about the SAPA activities and how the Secretariat could assist the SAPA board to implement the policy decision and strengthen the relationship among member bodies to take the SAPA to a greater height. It is a true pleasure for me to participate in this webinar. Ladies and gentlemen, governments at all levels are losing billions of rupees on fraud, corruptions, and cybercrimes. Prosecution of financial frauds in South Asia hampered partly by lack of experienced investigators and prosecutors. The government agencies and multinational corporations spend huge sums to retain expatriates, forensic and investigative auditors to come and unravel complex cases of frauds. International Federation of Accountants suggests that both forensic accounting and fraud awareness could be enhanced as part of the formal qualification and continuous learning processes. They also encourage professional accountancy organizations to ensure their members to have access to relevant high-quality continuing education and certification programs. In that context, Digital Accounting and Assurance Board of ICA India is building digital competencies to ensure its members to meet challenges and leverage opportunities of digital era. One of the most important initiatives taken by the Institute was issuing of forensic accounting and investigation standards, which will be beneficial not only to the members of ICA India, but for the entire region of South Asia. In addition to that, board has introduced post-qualification courses on system audit and digital competency maturity model for upgrading firms in digital landscape. Similarly, other institutes in the region also have taken many initiatives to conduct various programs on the subject area. In conclusion, I wish to mention that one of the important aspects is that technology-centric roles are growing rapidly, and those who want to apply their digital native skills to help solve real business success issues will have lots of opportunities in accountancy roles. With automation increasing, there are emerging opportunities for young accountants to build skills and capabilities in applying technology to drive business efficiently. With that, let me thank once again the chairman and the organizing committee for inviting me, and I wish the webinar all success. Thank you. Take care. Stay safe. Over to you, Sharma.
Thank you, sir. I'm sure we will live up to your expectations. To make this event even more memorable, we have with us a visionary with a strong academic leaning and have a deep professional insight, CA Dr. Debashish Mitra ji. He is the President of Institute of Chartered Accountants of India. I would like to request CA Debashish Mitra sir to please continue with the welcoming remarks, sir.
Yes. Good evening, everybody. I hope you can hear me. Ishal, you can hear me,
Yes,
right?
sir.
Very much, sir. Very much. Please go ahead, sir. Very much.
Yes. And sorry, I have a bit of a throat problem. My voice may not be very clear. But first of all, a very warm welcome to the President of SAFA, Mr. Bandara. I know I could not meet him, when he was in Delhi. Mr. Neha Jambusaria, the Vice President of SAFA, Aniket Talati, the Honorable Vice President of this Institute of Chartered Accountants of India, Charanjit Singh Nanda, the Chairman of the DAB, the Digital Accounting and Assurance Standards Board, and of course, Dayanibas Sharma, the Vice Chairman, and all ladies and gentlemen who are listening to me. First of all, it was really my misfortune that I could not meet Mr. Bhandara when he was here. But I hear such good things, Mr. Bhandara, about you from my council colleagues, Nandaji and Dayanibas Sharma, who were there with you, and also, of course, from Neha Jambusaria. I'm sure that next time there will be an opportunity for us to meet each other. Let me tell you how happy I am that we are organizing this program on the forensic auditing. The institute, I would like to believe, is a leader in developing the forensic standards. There are 23 standards that we have developed, and we hope that you see the membership of the institute, and we have now nearing 4 lakh members and about 8 lakh students. And we hope that the membership of the institute will use these standards for their best advantage. But along with these forensic audit standards, we have also developed the sustainability reporting standards. Today, I believe that we are the leaders in this area. And I'm very happy to let you know that I am seated next to me is Mr. Sandeep Singhal, Chairman of Sustainability Reporting Standards Board, who is doing fantastic work in ensuring that the sustainability reporting standards find their rightful place. The institute, I'm sure, will do everything possible to propagate not only the sustainable reporting standards, but also the forensic standards. And I'm sure under the leadership of Nandaji, will grow leaps and bounds, and we will really be considered as one of the best and the finest in these newer areas for the profession and also for the stakeholders. With these words, I wish you all the very best. To Mr. Bhandara, looking forward to meeting you very, very soon. And to everybody else, all the very best. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir, for the encouraging words. We as budding chartered accountants have a lot to take from you. Next up, I'd like to welcome CA Dayanibas Sharma ji, the Central Council member, ICAI, and Vice Chairman DAB, for the vote of thanks.
Thank you very much, Sharma ji. President sir, you mentioned that
Yes.
your voice is bad, but your smile speaks everything. So we are always going to look at your smile and be happy, and you communicate what you have to communicate with your smile and your eyes. So
Right.
your address is a value add for us. But yes, the message goes with a very simple smile of yours. Thank you very much for covering all the aspects of the forensic accounting standards, which has been flag for the institute in the last term. It has been a good journey altogether. Under the able presidentship again, now the past president, Niyar sir, thank you very much for making it possible to come today. And I was fortunate to meet you and the President SAFA on the Sunday for having our SAFA meetings. And I hope, Bhandara sir, you actually would be happy with the discussions and deliberations which we had on the education front in total. More importantly, a person with a lot of vision, Aniket Talati, who is a Vice President of the Institute of Chartered Accountants of India, has played a very important role in the last term for participating to draw this financial forensic standards. Thank you, Aniket ji, for making it possible. And I know the midnight oils which we have burned across by managing Bhandara sir 200 chartered accountants at the national level who have done it pro bono basis, that too all online. So this is the biggest pride with Institute of Chartered Accountants in India takes, that most of the other institute people have to pay for getting the standards done. Whereas in case of Institute of Chartered Accountants of India, 200 such professionals have come forward, given their contribution. We have done it virtually. I don't know how much money we have saved. More importantly, we have effectively utilized the entire COVID period to ensure that we become, in the toughest time, global leaders to introduce the concept of forensic standards. So this has been a journey which has been there. But now, under the able chairmanship of Nandaji, it's been a great opportunity for me to work again under a very seasoned council member who has been there in the council from quite a long time. Thank you, Nandaji, for taking me as your vice chairman in the board. And it is always a pleasure to work with you. Friends, I can only tell you in total, the people who are going to be the speakers today to share their views are those people who have actually participated in designing the forensic standards. So it's going to be a very interesting learning journey for you all people when Mr. Harish Dua or Mr. Kulkarni is going to talk about the subject in total. Thank you, Harish ji and Kulkarni ji, for making it possible to come today and share your total overviews. And friends, one important part is that this overview is going to give you a real clear picture that it's not forensic audit standards, is forensic accounting standards. And why it is not audit and why it is accounting, I'll request Harish ji to take up that particular matter in the entire discussion, and how we have to see from different eyes altogether. It is not an audit function in toto. It is an accounting function, and there is a different part and there is a detailed description to that, because 2 days we have only deliberated on one thing, which was whether it is forensic accounting or whether it is forensic audit. So Bhandara sir, there has been a lot of deliberation which has taken place at the time when we were coming out with these kind of standards, which gives a detailing of the activities that need to be performed, where we can see a standardization in delivery of all the chartered accountant services. That was the whole logic with which we wanted to work. So thank you all people, all the leaders, Mr. Bhandara, Mr. Nihar Jambusaria, Devashish Mitra ji, Aniket Talati ji, my chairman, and more importantly, Sampoorn Sharma, who's actually been ensuring that the entire program goes well. Thank you all. Thank you very much. The program will start now. So, Sampoorn, I request you to kindly ensure that the conduct is in an effective manner where people get engaged, and you are actually going to be relieved completely when Mr. Harish Dua or even Kulkarni ji is going to speak. Thank you all. Thank you very much. Happy learning.
Thank you, sir. I'll take this responsibility as you have given me, sir. Thank you. To start off with this topic for today, which was overview of forensic accounting and investigation standards, we have with us today a very eminent speaker, Mr. Harish Dua ji. He has a finance and business professional with over 37 years of experience in the area of governance, risk, and ethics. He is currently serving as an advisor, forensic accounting and investigations standards with DAB, and he was also associated with standards. He was also associated with Standards on Internal Auditing Committee, and he is also serving as adjunct faculty at School of Corporate Governance, Indian Institute of Corporate Affairs, part of MCA, and an adjunct faculty at Jaipuria School of Business on the subject Business Ethics and Corporate Governance. I'd like to request Mr. Harish Dua sir to please initiate this session. Welcome, sir. Thank you.
Good evening. Am I able? I hope you can hear me.
Very much, Mr. Dua. Please go ahead. Very much.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. And thank you very much to DAB Chairman, the Institute President, Vice President, sorry, I should start with the President of SAFA, Mr. Bhandara, and all the dignitaries who have spoken so well to set the stage for our discussion on this important topic of FAIS, and very good overviews given by these gentlemen in our journey towards putting these standards out, and how we were all involved at a very high level, and the contribution of a whole team of 200 odd professionals, mostly chartered accountants, who have given their time and effort in allowing us to capture the best practices and putting these standards together. No doubt they are one of the best that I've seen, and we've done a whole lot of research to see who all has got anything on this subject matter, and there's no other institute in the world who has these kind of standards. And since they have come out, I have also had the privilege of interacting with a whole lot of professionals in this area who have spoken very supportively in the excellent work done by the institute in putting these standards together, because they go a long way in allowing the professionals to get the right frame of mind in which we all need to work in this area. It's not an easy area. It's a highly complex in many ways, and it's quite different from audit, as has already been elaborated or mentioned by Mr. Dayanivasi, in particular with regard to how we talk about forensics and forensic audit, which is a misnomer, which I will cover. But with that kind of a quick overview, I will immediately go on to my presentation, because we are a bit short of time. But I will take my time to give you a quick overview on what these standards are about, and take you through the first few set of documents, the overarching documents, the 100 and 200 series, and the key concepts which I will cover. And Mr. Kulkarni will take over from me later on to cover the rest of the standards. Again, we will all be covering the overview because of the time we have in place, because we can always spend the whole day on this if you really want to cover them very well with good examples and things like that to reinforce the concepts. But for the time being, we're going to just give you an overview. At the same time, I request, if anybody needs any particular clarification, feel free to drop your question in the chat box. If I get a chance to go through it, I will make the effort to answer those as well along the way, and maybe that can give us a little bit of interactivity as well. So feel free to raise your particular questions as we go along. But otherwise, I will go in a bit of a fast track mode. I will share my screen now and have a presentation in this regard. I hope you can see my screen with this presentation.
Yes, sir. The screen is
Mr.
visible.
Sharma, can you confirm, please, for me?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. The screen is visible, sir.
Excellent. Okay, I will now put it on. One second, something happening. All right. Basically, we'll talk about the objectives, why the standards were put in place, where we are vis-a-vis their journey. We're of course not there yet, because some more information is forthcoming in the form of guidance notes and all, which we'll talk about their applicability, and I will spend a little time on the definition with regard to audit versus the standard. And like I say, I will cover the basic principles and the 100, 200 series. So moving on, the reason, of course, is that we all want to raise our own standards. And if we want to make change, the first thing we need to do is to improve our own personal standards. And this slide and this message goes very well with what we're trying to do. And can you, okay, I have a message on the screen. Oh, is it visible now?
No, sir. No. It's black.
Okay, let me put it screen mode again. Are you able to see the screen now?
Yes, sir. Now it is visible.
Okay. So I'll go on to the objectives. Basically, we are looking to codify. We have taken the download of a whole lot of professionals, and the best practices have been encapsulated in these 23 standards. And we are using that to clarify the expectations of all the stakeholders as to what these standards are all about and what is expected from the professional and the stakeholders. They basically also cover the definitions, which puts all on the same wavelength insofar as the terminology that we use in this domain. So when I say forensic, we hope that the other people also understand the same thing, because many a times what happens is we start using or misusing some of the terminology, and then you don't really know what the other person means, which is the main reason for, one of the main reasons for having these terms, key terms all defined here. Of course, quality is the overarching objective. Basic quality benchmarks have been set with these standards, and they also help to harmonize the overall performance of all the professionals in this area. They support the basic knowledge and guidance that we need insofar as conducting our assignments are concerned, and they also allow us to evaluate our performance insofar as compliance is concerned. At the end of the day, they basically help protect the profession and the credibility of the profession, and so which was one of the main driving factors behind these standards. On the screen, I hope you can now see page 5, where I present the snapshot of these standards. They go in these 7 series that we've already mentioned. There are 3 in the overarching documents, which I will cover right now. And then there are 4 concepts that are introduced, and they basically apply to all the standards, these key concepts in the 100 series. 200 series gets a little deeper into engagement level, relevance, and 300 series gets into even more deeper into how the actual assignments that we take are to be executed. And then, of course, there are certain specialized areas that are also very relevant in this area. There are 4 of them with regard to data analysis and digital domain, loans and borrowings. There is one more standard that is in the process of getting drafted and issued on related and connected parties, and it's forthcoming very soon. And we wrap up the document literature with the standards on reporting results and quality control. Udayji will be covering the 300 to 400, 500, 600 series. I will cover the first 3. So as regards the overarching documents, basically these 3 documents set the stage of what these standards are about. Preface introduces these standards, and it also outlines the process that we took or take in preparing each of these standards. And I will give you a quick overview of that, just to basically impress upon the reader as to the rigorous process that we went through in generating this set of literature. Framework basically gives an overview of the structure and the terms, and also the fixed format that we use in each of these standards. Basically, they're very short and sweet standards. No one standard is more than 4 or 5 pages, and they follow a very fixed format. So they're very readable and very easy to grasp. Basic principles are certain principles that we outlined, 10 of them, and I will give you a quick snapshot of that as well. Moving on to the details of the preface, basically these are principle based. In other words, they talk about what is expected of the professional, focused on the outcome of the subject matter. In other words, they don't tell you how you have to do something, but what is expected of you. For example, if you look at the standard on planning, it won't tell you how you go about the process of planning with a checklist and all that. No, what it tells you is that if you are a professional and you are taking on an assignment, that then you have a responsibility to do some planning, and that there are certain essential steps that you need to take in the planning process. Like, for example, understand the business and environment, have a discussion with the stakeholders, look at the IT environment and things like that. So these are certain key steps that talk about the what. Being principle based, their focus is what you really need to or are expected to do. But the guidance notes will be coming later that I mentioned earlier. They will help the professional with the how. Okay, and the how will have things like checklists for the professional to add as a ready tool to apply in their assignments. And so they will basically, if you follow the guidance, you will have a lot of help in the compliance aspect of these standards. As regards applicability, they're mandatory in nature, not yet, but hopefully eventually, once these have been understood and applied in the engagements and assignments over a period of time, each of the standard will be reviewed by the council and made mandatory as we go along. There is also a chance that because there are no other standards in India or the world for that matter, that the regulators and the government might choose to make them mandatory on non-CAs as well. That kind of discussion probably is happening behind the scenes, I understand. And eventually you may have a situation where they may apply to everyone, even non-CAs, perhaps in a staggered manner, like for big frauds or listed companies or things of that nature. But anyway, that is not set yet. It's just supposition on our part. But moving on, as regards the methodology, there is a very rigid 6-step process through which each standard goes through, which includes a lot of deliberation by a study group of professionals, by the DAP themselves, and then an exposure draft is issued for 30 days, and the general public provides inputs to the drafts. And this input includes inputs from the regulators, the government agencies. For example, SEBI has said in certain inputs, we had inputs from the CAG of India, and there were some inputs from a whole lot of other set of regulators and professional bodies that provided inputs along the way to each of these standards. And their inputs, each input was deliberated upon, and the changes, appropriate changes were incorporated. And so each of those standards have gone through a whole lot of input. Like Mr. Aniketji was saying, we even spent almost a whole day on the definitions and what all the definition wordings should be word by word. So you can imagine the amount of effort that has gone through in this whole process, which is what gives it a whole lot of credibility. So the other thing I wanted to cover with regard to the framework is the fact that it is can be depicted in the form of this pantheon that you see in front of you, which shows how the foundation of code of ethics is what these whole standards sit on, and the definitions are what drives the whole agenda. Then you have the basic principles, one of the key pillars. The key concepts are another set of pillars, and then the mandatory standards are the third pillar. The optional or non-mandatory guidance notes also support the whole framework. And the kind of definitions is what you see, a couple of them on the screen. They are just indicative of the nature of the definitions that we've gone through. For example, forensic accounting very clearly brings out the fact that the focus is on discovery and evaluation of evidence by the professional to interpret and communicate suitable findings for court of law. Okay, so there is this legal angle that comes into play, and the communication is with regard to findings. Okay, as we go along, we will elaborate on these definitions and tell you why we missed out on some things. For example, the definition doesn't include anything about issuing of opinion. Okay, it talks about communicating findings, which basically the standard on reporting will tell you that what is expected of a professional is to submit his findings and maybe a conclusion of those findings, but not to issue an opinion. So that is the level of information that we had gone through. Investigation definition is also there, which talks about a systematic and a critical examination of the facts and records and documents for a specific purpose. For example, the purpose could be fraud and or a violation of law, or the purpose could be a code of conduct violation, things like that. So, and when you are looking at things more critically, using maybe forensic accounting as a starting point and moving on to the further area of investigation, then you get the whole picture of these standards and you will understand and appreciate them much better. The framework also talks about this fixed format that I mentioned earlier, the 6-step approach that we take in putting together each standard, none of which has more than 4 or 5 pages, most of which focuses on section 3, which is the requirements. And each standard have no more than 4 or 5 requirements that are important with regard to that subject matter, which is what I will cover in the overview. I will not get into each standard in any great detail, but just focus on a few key requirements, just so it gives you a flavor. There is no better way to understand these standards other than to go through this document on your own, do your own reading, and get your own better appreciation of what they're all about. But here's my overview. I will move on to the definition, and I want to start with something called forensic accounting, because this term is getting used a lot, and actually it's a bit of a misnomer because the term forensic is different to the term audit, and when you combine the two, you get a bit of a khichdi, a mishmash that is not actually suitable for consumption. For example, the audits culminate in an expression of an independent opinion, which is not the case with forensic. And if you look at forensic accounting, the work culminates in the reporting of evidence discovered, which may be suitable for a court of law. And it has nothing to do with the opinion of the professional. The opinion that has to actually come from a judge, a second or a third party. Okay, our job as a professional is to present the facts. The judge looks at the law, the facts that we deliver to them, puts them together to reach a conclusion of guilt or innocence, which is why it is not really an audit. In the audit, our opinion matters a lot. Nobody looks at the evidence as much as the report that we issue on true and fair. Hence, when you combine audit with forensics, it is a bit of a dangerous combination, honestly. And that is why we in the deliberations in putting these together reached the conclusion that no audit report should refer to this terminology of forensic audit. Okay, so I will move on to give you a little bit more elaboration on this, but I won't take your time. This is something I put together. It's not part of the literature. Here, I'm just making that distinction of why the two are different, apart from what I've already covered with regard to the conclusions in the report. You will realize that statutory audit has a different approach. Internal audit even has a different approach. But these two, which are audits, have a completely different approach and to forensics and investigations. Okay, now, as you know, statutory audit is mandatory. Internal audit is becoming mandatory. In many companies in India, it is mandatory already when they meet a certain size and requirement of borrowings. So you have government imposed internal audits there. Forensic accounting is also now mandatory in some cases where there are, for example, IBC cases, the judge or the other parties require a forensic accounting or an investigation to be conducted. For example, they are perhaps very concerned about fund diversion, in which case they would appoint a professional to look into that matter and whether there have been any funds that have been diverted in an illegal manner. So you have those situations. There are, I have a slide on each one of these, but since we're short of time, I will kind of skip through this. There are articles coming that will get into the details of this, that you may want to look at it on your spare time. But since we're short of time, allow me to just quickly run over this. They basically elaborate on the fact that we should not mix audit and forensics when we are discussing and we are doing our work, which is why I will now just skip ahead, if you allow me to just quickly go through the basic principles. If you have any questions, I will take those as we go along. But for the time being, allow me to go ahead and complete my presentation, my bit of the presentation. I'll quickly check to see if there's any. Sampurn, is there any questions that have come through in the chat box?
Sir, the questions I think we will take after the end of the session.
Okay, okay then. Then I will carry on with my presentation, and we will just. Okay, are you able to see my slide principles? Sampurn?
Sir, the screen is visible, but it's not the full screen.
Okay, I'll do it one more time. I'm realizing that maybe there is some connectivity issue at my end. Any better?
No, sir, but you can see the screen.
Oh, acha. Let me do one thing. Let me close. I think it may be because I'm using too much memory here. So let me close some things I have on the screen, which may be consuming a lot of space and whatever. So let me just close some screens. I hope that will improve the presentation. Okay, I hope this is better. So we basically have 10 basic principles. 5 are on attributes. They are, usual things like independence, integrity, the need to take due professional care, maintaining confidentiality, and having the appropriate skills and competence to perform our job. And they focus on the professional and his credibility. Maybe I will stop my Sampurn, I'm going to close my screen. I think that is taking some space, space. So let me just do that for a minute. Just give me a minute. I think this might improve my connectivity and therefore the screen sharing, huh?
So the screen was fine just now.
Okay, excellent. All right. So the first 5 basic principles are basically defining whether we have all the requirements to be able to conduct our assignments, and they get into the attributes of what we bring to the table through our credentials. Do I have the required experience? Do I know enough about cybersecurity if I'm doing a cybersecurity assignment, and things of that nature? Now, the other 5 basic principles cover the manner in which I conduct my assignments. They talk about whether they give credibility to the output that I'm going to deliver. Did I do my work by understanding? Number 6, contextualization of the situation. And in fact, this one I will cover in a minute because not everybody understands this. Did I put finding the truth as the most important thing or not? Did I respect the rights and obligations of all the stakeholders? Did I separate my own opinions from the facts that I'm gathering? And did I maintain the quality of the work that is expected of a professional? So these 5 basic principles with regard to the performance of my work have been defined in this document called Basic Principles. And we all as professionals should go through all of these 10 to make sure that we fulfill the fundamental requirements to be able to conduct these assignments. Now, if we feel that we are short in some respects, then we have an obligation to make sure that we fulfill the shortcomings before we accept any assignment. For example, if I am not fully skilled and don't have all the competence, then I may choose to take on an expert on my team, hire an expert from the outside and make him a member of my team that will work with me on the assignment. That is basically the kind of things that are defined in the standards. So it talks about making sure that you are well skilled and well positioned to be able to execute those assignments. And so, and one thing I want to elaborate on is number 6 on contextualization of situation, which talks about the fact that when you look at any assignment, you have to understand the whole scenario. There is something that is introduced here in section 3.6 of the basic principles that is called predication. In any forensic accounting investigation, we require the professional to act on something called predication. And predication is, let's say, a trigger, a kind of a starting point. It's based on a review of the totality of the circumstances and the evaluation of the probability that a fraud may have occurred or some unlawful activity has happened, which requires an examination. Meaning there is some probable cause that you will do this assignment. It basically is the trigger that starts off the assignment. We cannot actually go on a fishing expedition. Like, let's say, see, in an audit, you can just go into the audit and look for any, errors or irregularities. Here, you actually have to follow some leads. You have to look for a starting point of predication, which could be a red flag. It could be a fraud indicator. It could be a whistleblower's list of complaints. It could be a series of allegations that are made against somebody. So whatever these predications are, you take that as a starting point. Okay. So that is one of the things that's mentioned in the basic principles. And you would work with your stakeholder to make sure you understand your predication very well, because it has to become part of the mandate, the starting point. That is why it's important. And you should, I strongly suggest that you understand this through reading the standards, because they should become the basis on which we start and execute our assignment. I have listed some from my own experience. This is not part of the literature. I have listed some examples of what we mean by fraud predication. And they are the things that I've just been talking about. For example, if there is an audit report that has been issued, it will give you certain control breakdowns, such as payments without proper approval. To my mind, that could be a predication. You could take that as a starting point, because payments without approval can point towards a irregularity. Okay. And then you require certain forensic techniques or certain investigative steps to prove or disprove that predication. It's very possible that these predications could be false alarms, but that is the job of the professional to collect the evidence that will prove or disprove the allegation or the predication. Whistleblower complaint that I just mentioned, red flags I already mentioned. Anonymous allegations is also there through whistleblower or other ways. Some suspicion or oddity by the stakeholder could be a starting point, or certain formal complaints of actual wrongdoing. Many times you get these complaints where people have said that so-and-so may have, done something wrong. Like the banks may appoint you as a forensic professional because they believe that there has been fund diversions and things like that. So those formal complaints can be a basis. So those are my thoughts on the predication. You will perhaps have your own views on this, and but the standards really ask us as a professional to pay due attention to predication before we commence our work. I will now talk about the first 100 series There are 4 standards in this area. Four standards. They are key concept standards. For example, 110 talks about nature of engagement. And what it says is that you need to understand the type of engagement that you're taking on. What is the mandate that you're getting from your stakeholder? And it says you can have 1 of 3 mandates, which I will talk about. But it says this mandate cannot be an audit because audit triggers auditing standards and not forensic accounting standards, which is why we're making that distinction. Okay. So whenever we take a mandate from our stakeholders, we say we're either doing a forensic accounting assignment, or we say we're doing an investigation assignment, or the third one that the standard talks about is, legal support. And we have to decide which one of these are we doing, and then have a mandate that documents that this is one of the ones that we are taking on. Secondly, 120, standard 120 is on fraud risk. And what the essence of this standard is that one professional has to assume that there is a probability of a fraud. Okay, whenever you do any of these assignments, they generally point towards the possibility of a fraud. And it therefore asks us as a professional to look for something called fraud indicators. This is a new term that is there, that actually not a new term, it's also used in auditing standard, and it's very similar to that. So if you're a chartered accountant and you read the auditing standards, you know that there is this fraud indicator term that also applies here in a very similar fashion. And this standard on 120 on fraud risk is similarly saying, identify these fraud risk indicators and treat them in an appropriate manner. And then there is this standard 120 on laws and regulation. Laws and regulation is important because, as you know, as the definition of forensic told us, that whatever we're doing in the form of gathering evidence has to be good enough to be able to present to a court of law. So the whole legal angle comes into play, and forensic is basically a merger of accounting and law, and therefore it is a combination of those two in a very, very important fashion. For example, when we are talking evidence, the law of evidence comes into play. And this law of evidence brings a whole new dimension to how the evidence is to be gathered, to be protected, and how the whole chain of custody has to be in place to make sure that there is no contamination or destruction of this evidence, and the reliability of the evidence is maintained in such a fashion that the judge can look at it without any concerns with regard to the fact that it may have been corrupted along the way. He should be able to take his judgment call without any concerns, because he knows that the law of evidence has been protected. So that's what this standard is going towards. It talks about the importance of making sure that we apply the laws and regulations in a very serious manner in these assignments. And then we have 140, which talks about applying hypotheses. It basically points towards the need to maintain neutrality in the manner in which we go about doing our assignments. Whenever we are looking at any assignments, we break it up into smaller pieces called hypotheses, and we do our forensic work in such a manner that we are collecting evidence that will tell us whether the hypothesis is true or false. To give you an example, if I am talking about fund diversions and I am being asked to look at the possibility of somebody having taken money that is received from the bank in the form of a loan, but abused or misused and diverted to personal use in some fashion, then I will take that as a predication, and I will generate smaller hypotheses. One hypothesis could be that the money was transferred from such and such account to another such and such account, one of which is a company account, the other is a personal account, and this hypothesis will allow me to collect evidence that will show that that an amount of XYZ on such and such date was in fact transferred through the let's say a check or money transfer, and it reached this other account on the same time, and whatever or the check cleared from this other account, and that will then confirm the hypothesis as right or proven. Or if I can't find the evidence that will confirm this transfer of these transactions, then it is proved wrong. So my hypothesis has to be proven right or wrong. And when I put all these hypotheses together, then I can present my summary of findings and basically allow the judge to decide whether or not there has been a fund diversion, as has been alleged by someone else. Okay, so hypothesis is the approach we take. We don't go looking for errors and irregularities and see what we can find. It is all done in a very methodical, planned fashion by breaking down the whole set of predication indicators that have come to us, or fraud indicators that have come to us, and taking a hypothesis approach to all of them, like a big jigsaw puzzle. Okay, the hypothesis leads us to modus operandi. The jigsaw puzzle, the whole picture is the modus operandi, and the pieces are the hypotheses that are relevant to build that whole picture together. So we take these jigsaw puzzle pieces in the form of hypothesis and draw the whole picture of the modus operandi. That is basically what the standards are alluding towards. I hope that clarifies this hypothesis concepts in a slightly better manner. Okay, Ji. Moving along, I'll go through each one of these standards in a little bit more detail. But like I said, the overview that you saw on the previous page to introduce them is basically the essence of these four standards that I've just introduced to you with regard to the key concepts. Now, the 110 key concept and nature of engagement, like I already mentioned, it gives you these three options of doing either a forensic accounting assignment or an investigation or a litigation support. The third one is litigation support, where you're actually giving help to your stakeholders, and the stakeholder could be a court of law. It could be a government agency or regulatory agency like the SFIO or the SEBI or whoever who has appointed you as a forensic expert to give them support when they take a case to the law. Okay, you could be an expert witness or whatever, but litigation support is one of the options that is allowed to the professional. The requirements that you see, the 4 requirements are coming directly from the standard. And in fact, 3.1 is something that I've just slipped in there, which talks about the fact that no part of the engagement or report shall refer to an audit, such as forensic audit. And it is basically to clarify or reinforce the fact that we don't believe in this terminology of forensic audit because of the reason that I've already explained to you in great detail earlier. And there is the standards. Each standard, this 110 talks about these 3 services. But if you go to 210, which we will cover area, there's an annexure there. And I've taken what you see on the screen is a snapshot of the annexure. It basically tells you in more detail when we talk about forensic accounting service, what do we mean? We give examples, 7 examples of the kind of service that can fall under this umbrella of forensic accounting. It could be financial statement manipulation, fund diversion, anti-money laundering, or evasion of license fees, dues, or some related party transaction concerns or violations, or it could be valuation or estimation damage losses by, let's say, an insurance company, or any suspicious transactions under IBC. Those are the kind of services or assignments that you can undertake under forensic accounting. Under investigation, again, an extra 210 gives examples. The 6 are listed here. Fraud investigations, including cyber fraud, insurance or personal injury cases, ethical or code of conduct violations, which are non-financial, as you can see, or whistleblower complaints, which could be non-financial as well. Even POSH allegations, prevention of sexual harassment, may not necessarily point towards financial gain, but other things, or bribery, corruption, theft kind of services are there, or intellectual property theft and things like that. So you have a whole set of investigative services of this nature that can be undertaken, which falls within the purview of these standards. Litigation support, like I already mentioned, you could be a fact witness, an expert witness, or you could be doing dispute resolution, which is like outside of the courts, you may get into mutual agreement of settling the disputes of whatever nature. Many of these cases that come from the bank, where the borrower is not paying the bank, they end up in in court, or sometimes outside the court, with regard to the disputes that comes into play as to why the loan document clauses are not getting fulfilled and things like that. Okay, so these are the 3 services that are there in nature of service, in nature of the engagement, that we as professionals need to look at. Fraud risk 120 talks about the fact that before I get into that, it talks about defining fraud, and it also talks about defining risk and how these 2 concepts come into play. And the concept of fraud triangle is implicit in these discussions in this standard. Many of you who have done these kind of assignments will be familiar with this concept of fraud triangle, where the motive comes into play, the opportunity is the second corner of the triangle, and rationalization is the third piece of that triangle. And it talks about how we as professionals should look for fraud indicators that apply to each one of the corners of the triangle. For example, if you're looking for fraud indicators, you may be looking for an evidence that points towards a motive of theft, or evidence towards exploitation of an internal control weakness. And it talks about evidence to be collected that confirms the fact that rationalization came into play, meaning the violation that the professional is observing is not a sincere mistake, but a deliberate act of deception. Because as you know, fraud is incorporates intent and deception. Those are the 2 key things that come into play whenever fraud is involved. And our job as a professional is to gather evidence to prove the fact that the person did something deliberately with intent to deceive. Okay, that is where the complexity comes into it. Because if I'm a CA and I'm doing an audit, then I'm not looking necessarily for evidence to prove intent. If I'm looking for audit violation, audit procedures, when I do my audit procedures, then the mere fact that there is a violation is good enough for me. It or if I find an error, that's good enough for me. I can just report the fact that the numbers are not right because of these errors. But when I'm doing a forensic audit work, then I need to actually look for the intent as well, evidence to support intent, where it gets very, very difficult. Because how do I actually find evidential matter that shows me how somebody was thinking. That is the challenges that the professional faces, which is why these standards point the professional in the right direction as to how you go about executing your work in such a manner that you can collect convincing evidence that will prove the fact that there has been violations or irregularities, and that these were done in a deliberate manner, that a fraud can be assumed to have occurred. Okay. So that's the 120 on fraud risk. There are fraud indicators that I already mentioned to you. Again, I won't get into the details. They're already there in the literature. Please go through it. Since I'm running short of time, I'm going to speed up a little bit. Laws and regulations, I've already covered how these standards bring accounting and the legal profession together, and they bring the importance of law into play. Now, they also mention the fact that you could be appointed under a certain law, for example, IBC, as a forensic professional to look into some fraudulent transactions or things like that. Or you could be appointed outside of any particular law. For example, a board of directors may appoint you because they have concerns over their CEO, and the CEO may be under suspicion of doing something unethical. And you could be an investigator looking into the concerns of the board, in which case you be appointed as per some sort of a contract. And there you will need to have a different arrangement, not necessarily covered under any particular law. Okay, so the standard recognizes these two different manners in which you as a professional can get appointed. And then it talks about these 6 requirements that need to be fulfilled with regard to the manner in which we ensure our own compliance with laws and regulations. For example, it talks about the fact that the work that we undertake has to be in accordance with the laws, and our mandate should recognize that. And that the mandate, if it is through a contractual agreement, it should also be consistent with laws and regulations. We cannot, for example, take on a case where we are required to find a fraud, for example. That is not acceptable. You don't go under the predication of actually looking for a fraud. Okay, so that is inconsistent with laws and regulations. And now standards also talk. Engagements to be conducted have to follow the laws and regulation. In fact, there are certain laws that tell you the procedures that you will take, or the kind of report that they expect you to issue. Okay, and the format of the report. So you have to understand the relevant and applicable laws and regulations. The professional should also actually take a very process-driven approach in identifying any deviations or violation of the laws. And where we encounter any complex matters, then we should actually seek legal advice from the experts who are familiar with those laws and regulations. And there is this last element about natural justice, principle of natural justice that can come into play. And we have to give due importance to that. And that talks about the fact that if we are looking for evidence that is pointing towards somebody who may have been the, let's say, the culprit, then there is a tendency on being asked by the stakeholders to pronounce people guilty. But, we can't do that. All we can do is we can present our findings to people who may have been involved to get their point of view and document their response as part of our reporting. And that helps us as professionals to fulfill this principle of natural justice, which talks about giving the other party an opportunity to give their point of view when they are being subject to allegations and things like that. So at times, our mandate may require us to get both sides of the story, in which case, then we will do that set of interviewing and getting the different their point of view, documenting it in the form of some sort of a statement and presenting that as part of our report, so that the person who's making a call, for example, it could be in the board of directors that I mentioned earlier, and that CEO who was being subjected to certain allegations, the board may say, please find the evidence, present it to the CEO, and also get his defense statements and incorporate that in your report, so that the board of directors has both sides of the story before they take their call. Okay, that's possible. And we in the standards, it's presenting you the option to comply with the principles of natural justice, if that is part of your mandate. Okay, moving on to the last of these, standard, applying hypothesis, which I've already introduced to you. The standard basically tells you what it is and how it is slightly different in the case of forensic accounting assignments vis-a-vis investigations assignments. Okay, so you need to look at the standards, make sure that when you are doing one or either of those assignments, then you are applying the concept of hypothesis in a proper fashion. For example, in the case of forensic accounting, if your focus is primarily on transactions and balances, then the hypothesis application is slightly different vis-a-vis if you're doing, for example, an investigation where you're getting into the human angle, in which case the hypothesis will have slightly different approach to it and those kind of things. In the case of hypotheses, we generally, in the case of investigations assignments, we are generally putting together the hypothesis to develop a modus operandi. Okay, the big picture that I mentioned. And these standards are covering both what the hypothesis in section 1.4, 4.1, elaborate on hypotheses. Then modus operandi is also mentioned in our standards under 140, 1.4 and 3.3 talk about modus operandi and what we need to do with regard to that. So you have to go through these standards and get a better appreciation of both these concepts of hypothesis and modus operandi, so that when you execute your assignments, you are reasonably aware of what is expected in regard to these two concepts. Okay, I will, I'm getting close to the end of my session. I think I have maybe another 10 minutes and I will quickly run through the 200 series. Udayji will be taking over as soon as I finish in about 10 minutes, and he will take over from 300 series. Now, 200 series, there are 5 standards in this area. 210 talks about engagement objectives, and it says how you have to establish 3 things: the purpose, the scope, and the expected outcomes right up front. Before we start the assignment, we should have clarity with regard to these objectives and how these 3 have to come together in a seamless fashion. Okay, and 220 talks about engagement acceptance and appointment. Many times we get appointed and not just put in a bid for getting accepted, and there is this distinction that is being made. And when we do that, before we do that, rather, we need to conduct something called a preliminary procedures, so that we are comfortable that we can take over this assignment, and we do something called due diligence steps. Okay, so the standards gets into these 2 things about preliminary procedures and due diligence prior to accepting any appointment. 230 is talking about using the work of an expert. If you're CA, you will be very familiar with this whole concept of using the work of an expert, because auditing standards also cover something very similar to this, and the requirements are also pretty much along similar lines. So I won't spend too much time on 230. 240 is talking about engaging with agencies. Agencies are those government and regulatory authorities or investigative authorities like the police and things like that, SFIO, and so on and so forth. And there may be similar authorities in the SAFA countries where you need to work with these stakeholders who may be using your output and maybe looking at the forensic reports that we issue to form the basis of legal proceedings. Okay, so when we deal with these bodies, we need to have a protocol and we need to do things very much in compliance with the relevant laws and regulations, because they come with their own powers through these laws and regulations, and they have their own responsibilities of ensuring, people don't abuse the law in any which way. Okay, so we have to work with these agencies in a highly specialized manner. Last standard in 200 series on 250 talks about communications with stakeholders. It defines stakeholders and it talks about the need for a continuous conversation and exchange of information. And it gets the stakeholders broken up into two types of stakeholders, the primary stakeholders and secondary stakeholders, where our obligation is to the primary stakeholders, which is the body that appoints us. Okay, so this is the essence of these 5 standards. I'll quickly run you through each one of them to give you a better snapshot. But then I want to leave a little bit, a few minutes, maybe 4 or 5 minutes for Q&A. So 210 about engagement objectives is flows on from 110 about nature of engagement that we've already covered, and where the 3 type of assignments or services were defined, like mentioned earlier. 210 section 3 gets into those 3 areas in more detail. It gives you examples of the type of objectives that you can take on in each one of those assignments. I won't go through it in detail because it's already there in your standards in form of an annexure which has the details. Here are the snapshot of that annexure. It talks about the nature of objectives that you can include in these assignments. And it also 3.4 section gives you very clearly a requirement that you cannot take on a assignment with a particular outcome, such as finding a fraud or identifying the guilty. That is something that is prohibited as per this standard on 210 on objectives. Okay, and it also has this little requirement that whenever you are asked to do certain preliminary work, some engagements are like pre-audit kind of engagements. They don't use the term pre-audit, that's my term I'm using here. But basically, many times we get appointed to see that some company may be subject to forensic audit by some authority. So they may hire a professional to do something similar before the authority does their work to make sure that there is no non-compliance. But if we do that, the standard says, please don't do it anything unethical, like don't allow evidence to be destroyed, for example. I'm just giving that as an example, because that can make us an accomplice to a crime. Okay, so the professional has to be very careful when you take on those kind of assignments. Okay, the standard gets into that a little bit. Okay, moving on to 220, it basically says you do 2 things called preliminary procedures and due diligence. Okay, and that is something that before we take on the assignment, we should do that. Next page that I show you talks about the examples of the kind of steps you can do as part of this due diligence exercise. For example, you need to understand the primary purpose of the engagement, who the stakeholders are, what their relationships are there any conflict of interest between us and them, or between them or they are. For example, if I have a stakeholder which is a bank and I have a stakeholder which is a promoter, is there anything going on between the officers of the bank and the promoter family or whatever that may put us in an awkward situation? So, as a professional, we need to be alert and aware to these kind of relationships that may be floating around. We need to also be aware at certain execution challenges. For example, that if a bank is appointing us to look into the affairs of a company, but the company is very unwilling to give us full access to the required information or the systems, then we may have a scope limitation. Okay. So before we take on this kind of work, we should be alert and aware of the fact that we may face certain execution challenges. That's an example of some sort of a due diligence we need to do when we take on these assignments, and so on. So, okay. So moving on to 30. Like I said, I won't spend too much time on this. This is very much similar to the auditing standards. It basically tells you that you should have full authority and have a good relationship with the expert that is doing the work for you. Because if you're going to take the ownership of their output, then you have to have the comfort level that what they've done is of a very high quality standard, and it will fulfill your obligation and your objectives in finding the truth and presenting your findings to the stakeholders, which could be a court of law. See, one thing you have to remember, if the report goes to the court of law, then unlike an audit where your evidence isn't subject to any scrutiny, in a court of law, the opposite party has full authority to cross-examine each and every evidential matter. They can rip apart our report if our evidential matter is not strong enough and doesn't speak for itself. So we as a professional have to be very careful when we present our findings, and our evidence matter has to be such strong. Of course, Udayji will talk more about evidence and documentation and whatever, and how the standards talk about reliable sources and sufficient evidence and things like that. So we need to be very careful when it comes to that. Okay, and the expert should be able to help us with that aspect. Now, the one on engaging with agencies, I already mentioned. You could have law enforcement agencies like the police or whatever. You could have regulatory bodies like the SEBI or RBI. You could have educating authorities like the NALC, LT, and those kind of bodies. So all these third parties, bodies who are party or stakeholders in the work that we do, we have an obligation to them as much as they have the powers to take what we got and look at our reports and do what they have to do to reach their fulfill their obligations. And the standard talks about how we have certain obligation to them through laws, but we have to be careful with our own basic principles. We have dual obligations with our stakeholders as well. And if we're going to share information, then we have to keep our stakeholder in aware of what information we are sharing with them and things like that. And we have to maintain a document trail to how this information exchange is happening. So the standard gets into all those details. The last one, communication with stakeholders, like I mentioned earlier, the appointing authority, which could be a board of directors, it could be even the court of law. Whoever appoints us is our primary stakeholders. We work directly with them. And the other people who are other stakeholders, we should not be sharing directly with anything with them. It should primarily be through our primary stakeholders, unless the primary stakeholder has given us full authority to share something without any restriction with somebody else. Okay, so our output has to be very focused on fulfilling the mandate and the appointment authorities' obligations. And when we communicate, we have to do two things. Keep two things in mind: the essential matters and the significant matters. These are the two things that the standard says that you should be aware of, and it gives us examples on what are the kind of things that come into play when we talk about essential matters. For example, I'll just move on to the next sheet. It says essential matters are engagement as execution kind of issues, and significant matters are general in nature, which can actually have a big bearing on the outcome or the output that we deliver. Okay, so these are examples there on the screen for you to see. They're there in the standards themselves. Just be aware of them. And when you are doing your communication obligation, then you have to keep these things in mind. Okay, so that is all that I wanted to cover. I think a 300 series is being covered by Udayji. I assume he is already there. I know I have probably eaten a little bit into his time. I'm going to stop sharing the screen now, and I will start my video in case there are any questions. I need to answer. I need to answer any questions. I'll give it whatever 2-3 minutes that are available for us.
Sir, there are quite a few questions actually. So I was suggesting that we let Uday sir speak, and after that we can have the question answer session.
Okay.
If you-
Sure, we can do the Q&A right towards the end as well. If
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Udayji will always be there to take those questions as well, in case I'm not.
That was quite an insightful take on the topic, sir.
Yeah.
So
Great.
next up, so we have covered the preface, the framework, basic principles. Then we have covered the 100 series and the 200 series. Next up, we have another eminent speaker among us, CA Uday Vamanrao Kulkarni ji. CA Uday Kulkarni is a practicing chartered accountant with professional experience of 25 years. A fellow member of Institute of Chartered Accountants of India, sir is certified internal auditor and also certified information system auditor CISA. He is also qualified as insolvency professional under Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code of India. Apart from practicing, sir is a national faculty for bank concurrent certificate course and forensic accounting course of the Institute of Chartered Accountants of India. He has imparted training on various aspects of forensic auditing, money laundering, legal aspects, and cyber security for legal and investigation officers in Sri Lanka, Nepal, CA Institute, RBI Academy, CIFO, SBI Credit Risk Academy, NIBM, etc. Mr. Uday Kulkarni, sir, I would like you to take over from here so that we can start with the rest of the topic.
Yeah, good evening, everybody. I think keep my video off and I will make it on once the QA sessions will be there, so that at least the audio quality and the PPTs will be visible and audible to all the participants. So I hope you can understand.
Yes, no problem, sir. No problem.
Yeah, okay. So welcome once again, all the participants. Let me share the PPT. I hope PPTs are visible to everybody. Sampurna, can you please ensure that?
Yes, sir. PPTs are visible.
Yes, we can see it very clearly, Mr. Udayji. Thank you.
So thank you, Harish ji. Thank you for the coverage which you have covered for the 100 series, and continuing with that. Now we are landing up to the execution part of the assignments. That's what the 300 series of the standards talk about. So under the 100 series, we have conceptually cleared about the different aspects related to the forensic areas. What is forensic accounting, investigations, and all other things. In the 200 series, we dealt with engagement management and how to go about that, how to use the experts' services, and then again, communications and all that part. Now, actually, the performance on what we are able to cover up, how we are going to cover up, and how we are going to execute our performance, our final output, all that depends upon how we are executing the assignments. And that's what the 300 series is talking about. So if you see in the 300 series, whatever the actions, whatever the modes are required for the execution of the assignments, what the performance is required for the executions of the forensic area, all those steps we have covered in these various standards. There are 6 standards related to this execution of the assignments. And obviously it starts from the planning of the assignments. Then it talks about the evidence and documentation part. Then actually what should be covered under the work procedures. So we will go one by one and we'll try to understand what is it's all about as an overview. So in the first part, as a part of the execution, we have to plan, right? For any assignment, for any engagement, whether it is audit or any type of the assignment, what is more important is the planning aspect. But here, all the participants will agree that the planning for the forensic is bit quite different from any other type of an engagement. Basically, we do have experience and we can well plan about our audit engagements because we are doing that kind of a task or that kind of an assignments in a methodical manner. Why I am saying that we are doing it in a methodical manner? Because whether it be the internal audit or whether it be the statutory audit or any other type of audit, it is kind of a structured assignment. I'm calling it as a structured assignment. But in case of an forensic engagement, it is not structured. You never know what type of the fraud, what type of the modus operandi of the fraud. Even we are talking about that we are investigating similar type of the fraud. Suppose you are already investigated the payroll related fraud and the second assignment is also related to the payroll fraud. But the modus operandi of the two frauds will be definitely different, right? In one case, they might have introduced the ghost employees. In the second case, they might have played with the salary amount. Okay, anything is possible because the modus operandi depends upon what the perpetrators have done. Similarly, in the forensic accounting case, every case is unique in itself. That's why I call it that is not a structured one. And that's why the planning is different for different types of the assignment, or I may say for each type of the assignment, you will have to plan slightly different. In the standard, what we have done. So first we have distinguished between what is engagement and what is assignment. So that clarification or the differentiating point between the engagement and assignment, because many of the times we interchangeably use these words. Sometimes we call it as an engagement, sometimes we call it as an assignment, but what is exactly the engagement and what is exactly the assignment? This probably will be useful for the investigation type of the services, forensic services, because there could be one fraud, there could be multiple fraud, there could be one legal issues, there could be multiple legal issues with which you have to deal with, and your stakeholders might expecting you to cover all those areas or all those frauds which might have taken up as a part of an engagement. So that is a contractual mandate. But what will you do at the time of executing those assignments? You will break them in a part, right? So you will cover up the first type of the assignment. You will deal with the first kind of a legal issue, and that could be a slightly portion, I can say, or the part of the overall engagement, and that's what we call that part as an assignment. So here the standard is dealing with the planning of each assignment. Remember, so we are dealing with that part of the engagement. So what are the essential features? It is well said that if you spend 60% of your time in the planning, 30% in the execution, and 10% in the reporting, you will get a great success. But normally what we do in practice is that we spend only 10% time in the planning, 60% in the execution, and 30% on the reporting. But what we have to do, we have to do it in a reverse manner. And that's why planning is a very, very important, because if you plan it clearly and you can say effectively, then half of your task of the performance will be completed. And for that purpose, what is required? So here in this standards, we have clearly brought out what are the requirements for this planning purpose, right? So first, you should have the knowledge about the business and environment with which you are going to handle the assignment. So whether you are handling the fraud investigations related assignment or the forensic accounting related with the banking sector, or you are going with the manufacturing sector, within the manufacturing sector, whether you are handling the assignment, let us say with the coal manufacturing, coal mining sector. So there are different types of the sectors with which we are going to handle these assignments. So the sector-wise knowledge is basically very, very important. Because why it is important? Because in many of the business fraud cases or the financial dispute cases, we should have a sound knowledge about the internal controls, about the fraud risk which could be there, as I hope that might have been covered under the 100 series. So that knowledge will come to us only if we are understanding that particular sector, that business processes. When I'm saying that we have to understand the particular business sector, that means we have to understand the business processes and the environment within which that sector works or that particular entity works. So that knowledge is essential. Then the risk consideration. So obviously, when we are getting appointed for the fraud investigation, so there could be a fraud risk. That fraud risk, as Hariji has rightly discussed in his coverage, is related to how we are defining it as a fraud. So there is a fraud triangle, there is a fraud diamond. So by looking at it, when we say about the risk consideration, here we have to plan for the red flags. What in a normal practical language, we call it as a red flag. So the fraud risk identification is done by identification of these red flags, and that will be coming to you only if you are having the proper business process related, internal control related knowledge, and then what are the weaknesses, and through that weaknesses what could be possibly the risk and how that risk could be exploited for the fraudulent transactions or the fraudulent manipulations of the accounting records. All this is joining together with your knowledge of that particular relevant business. Then the next thing we have to do in the planning is the discussion with the stakeholders. Actually, in the audit, we know what the stakeholders are expecting. In the statutory audit, what our report would be. In the internal audit, what our report would be. So we know that. But in this case, actually what the stakeholders are expecting as an outcome after doing this investigation, after doing this forensic accounting, what they are thinking for, what they are expecting, that clearly needs to be understood. Otherwise, if we will not understand their expectation, then our report will be talking about something else. In some cases, they may not have any intention to take any kind of a legal action, but they wanted to know what are the loopholes, what are the internal control weaknesses because of which the fraud have taken place, and they wanted some remedial actions to control that kind of things, right? To address that kind of a fraud risk. In some cases, suppose you are getting appointed by the various investigating agencies like the police or like any other investigation agencies, like in India, we call it as the CBI or the enforcement director. They might have different expectations. They might have looking at you to exploit or to collect the evidences which will give them a money trail or the asset trail, and which they could be able to submit in the court of law. So their expectation is slightly different from the expectation where we are carrying out a full-fledged fraud investigation in a particular company or a company which might have been facing the fraud issue. They might be expecting from you to give us suggestions as a part of the preventive mechanism so that in future, this type of fraud risk will be mitigated. So that expectation should be clearly understood. Technology deployment. Now, we all know that every entity, every organization, they are handling their business processes. They are conducting their business processes through the use of various digital technologies, right? So many of them might be using some ERP. Many of them might be using some centralized data center type of an architecture. So all that is driven by the various digital domain. So in that case, when we have to collect the evidences, right? So we need to understand that digital domain. Now, because of the existence of the digital domain, the transactions may be running into the multiple numbers. For that purpose, the analytical tools may be required. So what kind of an digital domain in which the organization is operating, and how many transactions with which we have to play, depending on that, we may have to use the appropriate tool set to collect those evidences. So for that purpose, the technology deployment, what kind of a technology deployment will be required, what kind of an expertise will be required, what kind of a data analytics tools will be required, what kind of a digital evidence collection related tools will be required, all that will be need to be planned in this planning stage. Then the resource allocation, of course, in the resource allocation, when we know that the business processes, their configuration with the digital domain, and then to collect those evidences or to analyze those data, whether we are having sufficient resources with us, human resources with us, expertise with us, that also needs to be assessed in this planning stage. If not, then of course, there is a standard which says that you can hire the expert services. But when we are hiring the expert services, we have to go according to that particular standard. And of course, the important part in the investigation is the hypothesis. So at the planning stage, you have to brainstorm a lot because you have to recreate the scene, you have to rebuild the modus operandi. And for that purpose, you will have to think about the various possibilities, and accordingly, you have to build up your own hypothesis. And you will have to decide about the testing about those hypotheses as a part of the work procedures. Some of your work procedures will prove something out of the hypothesis, but it may be also possible that some of your work procedure will give you the negative result about your hypothesis, about your theories. We can say that in a practical language, these are the theories by which the perpetrator of the fraud might have been doing this kind of an manipulation. So all these things will be a part of a planning stage, which we have discussed in 310. In the next 320, the 320 is talking about an important aspect about this forensic engagement. It is talking about evidence and documentation, right? We all know that forensic basic objective, collection of the evidences. But all the participants now might have come to your knowledge that there is a difference between the evidence which we collect for the audit purpose and the evidence which we collect for the forensic purpose. So let us say that suppose we want some information about the particular procurement transactions, right? So what we do in the normal audit course, we inquire with particular staff of the procurement department. He will tell us some of the procedures and we trust that, we rely on that, right, as an audit. And then of course we'll ask for the transaction related document, but basically we trust what he's saying about that. But in the forensic case, if the oral information is going to be collected or somebody is giving us an oral information, the question is whether that will be acceptable in the court of law as an evidence. That depends upon the country specific law. So when we are differentiating between the audit evidence, again, one of the example in which we give in India is that suppose in case of an outstanding balance in the bank account, suppose some bank account balance is appearing in the asset side of the balance sheet. What normally we ask for? We ask for the balance statement from the bank, which could have been downloaded from the internet banking kind of things. So we rely on that because for the audit purpose, we can trust that, we can rely on that. But when it comes to the forensic area, whether we are going to submit the said documents which you have used for the audit evidences, the question, the answer would be depending upon your country specific evidence law, because in India, there are different laws which says that how to submit an evidence related to the bank account confirmation. It requires to be signed and attested by the bank officers and all that. So here, this standard is very well defining the what is the evidence and what is documentation. So evidence needs to be collected from the reliable sources because that needs to be accepted by the court of law. That is the test of our evidence when we are collecting the evidence under the forensic. So that's why each country's evidence act will have something to say about when or what kind of an evidentiary test will be followed when the court will accept any sort of an evidence. Even it is applicable for the books of accounts. So when many of the times, all of you will agree that in the forensic accounting, many of the times you are going to submit the books of accounts as an evidence, right? But what is books of accounts? How the court looks at it as a books of accounts? Whether mere diaries in which some accounting entries have been written, whether that would be treated as a books of accounts? Whether any paper or piece of paper where the some transaction related information is written, whether that will be treated as a part of the books of accounts? So all these questions will stand in front of us when we are dealing with the evidences. So we have to see what the country specific law, evidence law is talking about, which test they are suggesting and how to how to decide that whatever the information, whatever the data, whatever the documentation we are collecting, what the test the court will apply, and whether the document is really going to be passed through that test, so that ultimately that will be helpful to our stakeholders. So that kind of things we have to keep in mind, and that we have discussed or elaborated in this 320. So that is what we are talking about as an evidence. It could be paper-based evidence, it could be document evidence, it could be electronic evidence. And most of the time now we are going to deal with the digital evidence, electronic evidence. So each country-specific law, again, they are dealing differently with these electronic records as an evidence and paper documents as an evidence. So we need to understand those provisions, and accordingly, we have to follow the procedures. Now, what is documentation? We all know that we have to maintain our working papers. So that is a documentation. So when we are performing our engagement or assignment, we are documenting various things. We may document our plan. We may document our work procedure. We may document our team allocation. We may document our the procedures related to the gathering of the evidences. We may document about the checklist which we have to obtain for the evidences. We may have to document about the interview questions. So there are a lot of documentation which could be the part of our assignment, and we can say that these are our own working papers. Many of the times what will happen, because we all have to understand, since this is a forensic is a part of the legal proceedings, many of the times we may have to appear in front of the investigating agencies or in front of the court for the testimony. In that case, as a part of the output, as a part of the reporting format, as a part of the report, we may have to submit the evidences which you have collected. But not necessarily we have to share our working papers, which we have called it here as a documentation. But in some cases, when in case of a testimony, when in case of an we are appearing as a fact witnesses, there probably we may have to refer our working papers, that is a documentation, and that we have covered up in this 320 kind of an stand. The 330, actually the 330 is talking about the conducting of a work procedures, right? So here we are going to execute our activities, our actions, which we have decided at the planning stage. So what we have done in the planning stage, so there might be two phases, phase 1 and phase 2, we can say like that. In the phase 1, that could be behind the scene, that could be off the field, and stage 2 could be on the field. In the normal practical language, we can say like that. So in the phase 1 manner, we might have done our brainstorming, we might have done with our hypothesis study, we might have developed some hypothesis. In the work procedures, what we have to do, we have to test those hypotheses. We have to collect the evidences which will support our hypothesis. It may be possible that we may get the evidences, we may not get the evidences, and depending upon that, our hypothesis could be proved or could be disproved, right? Because if we are not able to generate the sufficient evidences which will support our hypothesis, I think hypothesis has been elaborated nicely by the Harishji, so I'm not repeating again about the what is hypothesis. But as a part of the evidences, when we say that, okay, the loan amount has been diversified, the loan amount has not been utilized for the purpose for which the loan is sanctioned. So as Harishji has said, then whether it has gone from one account to second account to third account, that is the first possibility, that is the first hypothesis we have formulated. But suppose when we are tracking the accounting records, when we are tracking about the bank details of a particular borrower, if nothing coming out of that, or we are not getting sufficient evidences with an appropriate procedure, then we have to think alternatively, then we have to go for the second hypothesis, that what could be the other modus operandi. Probably all the loan amount might have been shown that have been paid to the legal with the legal procedures to some third party, and that the third party might have given it back to the borrower. That could be the one of the next hypothesis which we have to plan. So alternatives would be there, different hypotheses would be there. So it may be possible that if we are not able to generate sufficient evidences, then we have to change our hypothesis and we have to go for the next hypothesis. So all this will be the part of now work procedures, right? And even for the work procedures, we need to develop what kind of techniques, what kind of tools, because again, these evidences we have to gather within the digital domain. For that, again, we may have to deal with a number of transactions, data analytics tools will be required. So all that will be again a part of the work procedures, right? So which we have given a thought about at the planning stage. So that is covered under the 330, conducting the work procedures. In 340, we all know that collecting information is an important task in any assignment, whether it be the audit or whether it be the forensic assignment. So we have to collect a lot of information, and one source we are trying to collect evidences with various sources. One source with which we are trying to collect the evidences in the forensic is not, we cannot say that it is an oral information. In the audit evidences, what we can say that oral information provided to us, but nothing that kind of an space is available so that we can say that, okay, this oral information is passed. Whenever we are going to collect the information, we can say orally, the technique which we use for that purpose is interview, right? Now, interview, we all know what is the importance of the interview, because some of the statements or some of the information which we gather during the process of the interview, that could be used, Of course, there are again the country specific provisions in the Evidence Act, but I may say that if we follow the proper procedures for the interview, whatever the statements made out of that interview, sometimes it may be possible that the perpetrators, the fraudsters, that may give the acceptance that guilt, he is accepting that, yes, they have committed a fraud. That is an admission of the guilt, a confession, right? So that kind of a possibility is also there during the course of the interview. So here we are referring that conducting the interview from the point of view of collecting the evidences. And that's why here we are defined in this 340 that interview refers to a structured meeting. It is not an informal meeting, but it is a structured meeting. Why it is a structured meeting? Because our intention is clear. We are trying to gather the evidences. And when we are saying that it is a structured meeting, that means we are well prepared for that. We know what are the objectives of the assignment. We know what we are collecting as an evidences. What type of the evidences which could be generated out of this interview. It may be possible that we may generate the evidences of admission, confession, or totally that saying that no, this is kind of a mistake. That is also possible. Suppose some fraudulent transactions are entered into the books of accounts and we are investigating that. So the accountant might be giving us answer, no sir, this is not a fraudulent. We have not entered this transaction with the fraudulent intention, but this was a mistake. So that kind of things may come out of the interview. So how we are going to face with that, what we are going to handle, how we are going to handle the admission, confession, or even the negative responses. And even when they are giving the admissions and confessions, how we are going to prepare for ourselves to question those things. Because we all know that, again, as a forensic professional, we can only conduct the interview. We cannot say that we can interrogate that. That is not possible. Right. So all of us very well know that there is a difference between the authority which is available to the forensic professional and the authority which is available to the investigating agency. Investigating agencies, they do have or they do enjoy the authority for interrogations, right? But we cannot force them. We cannot force any participants, or we cannot force any stakeholders with which we are going to collect the evidences, or we are going to collect the information. And that's why we have to prepare the interview questions. That interview questions needs to be plotted in such a way so that we can gather more and more information. Some of the information will give us trigger to collect the further information. Some of the statements we may be used as an evidences. So it depends upon that, right? But again, we have to keep in mind that here we have to apply the principle of natural justice. We have to give them sufficient opportunity to put their thoughts. And that's why we have to consider the legal provisions also while developing the methodology. Also, we have to keep that all the statements which is made during the course of the interview, we have to maintain the confidentiality. Confidentiality does not mean that we are not going to include that in the report, because in the report we are going to include that, but we are not going to share that with any unwanted stakeholders, right? Unless and until there is a legal compulsion, unless and until there is a part of a legal proceedings where we have to disclose that kind of an information which has been shared during the interview, we will have to share that. But otherwise, we have to maintain the confidentiality, whatever the information which is shared during the interview. Otherwise, what will happen then? There could be the misunderstanding that at one time we are going to collect the information through the interview for the evidence purpose, and other way we are talking about the confidentiality. It's not like that, because as an outcome, as an evidences, we are definitely going to put that in our output in the report. But otherwise, disclosing that information, sharing with the unwanted stakeholders, we are not definitely going to do that. That's why point number 3 is talking about maintaining the confidentiality. Again, interview should be in the line with the defined scope, right? Because we all know that what the objectives we have to achieve. Because sometimes, again, in the fraud investigation, the scope would be different. So in the fraud investigation, there could be a depth in the interview procedures. In the forensic accounting, where we are working for any investigating agencies, the interview could be having a limited scope because of the limited scope which is there, because we are working for a specific section of the law, as Hariji has already mentioned, that in India we are having the insolvency and the bankruptcy code, we are having the money laundering act. So there are specific sections for which the investigating agencies may referring the case to us and asking for collection of the evidences. So in that case, our scope is bit defined, bit limited or restricted by that particular section. But in case of a fraud investigation, the scope could be broadened. So we have to keep all these things. And that's what I said. All these are unstructured. We cannot say in a one stay that, okay, this will happen again and again, this will be repeated. Okay, most of the time, all these things will be very or unstructured as per the scope of the assignment and what actually the fraudsters have played with that systems. So we have to accordingly plan about the interviews. We have to plot the questions accordingly. 350 is dealing with the review and supervision. Now, forensic is a teamwork, right? So, as a forensic team, we may have included some experts. We may have included our assistants. We may have now allocated the resources to the various aspects of the frauds. The team is collecting the evidences. The team is evaluating or verifying the documents. So all that work is going on as a part of the work procedure, what we have planned. But as a team leader, as a forensic professional, we need to understand that all our efforts, what is the target? All our efforts should be targeted at one objective. And what is that objective? As per the engagement objectives or the assignment objectives, whether we are collecting the effective evidences. Here I am specifically or purposefully using the word effectively. Effectively means the procedures which we have followed are as per the provisions of the country specific evidence act. And whatever evidence we are calling that as an evidence, that needs to be stand as an evidence in the court of law. And for that purpose, whatever the efforts our team is taking, right, we need to review their efforts. That's why there is 2 points. One is review and second is supervision. So review is what? Review is what they have done, what the work they have performed. Because it may be possible that some of our assistants, some of our team members, they may not know the differentiating point between the document and the evidence. Some of the documents, they may think that those are eligible, those will be get qualified to be submitted as an evidence, and they will come with a conclusion, sir, this is the evidence, right? But when we'll examine, when we'll verify, then as per our knowledge, we feel that, okay, this will not pass the test of the evidence act. But concluding that at the last stage of the assignment, in that case, we'll have to put the extra effort and we may not able to complete our assignment within the predefined timeline. So to avoid that, we have to fix some milestones like we do in the projects. And at each stage or at each milestone, we have to review what the documentation, what the evidences which is gathered by our team members, whether they are as per the provisions of the law. Because now we know what are the provisions of the evidence. Now, at what stage we have to verify that? Again, every forensic professional, they have to apply their best judgment according to the overall periodicity which has been given for the specific assignment. Within that, we can keep some timeline and define the periodicity for the review part. Right. What happens now, why the review is again important? Look at the third point, which you have categorically mentioned in these standards. So review the plan during the assignment to evaluate the circumstances have changed significantly to revisit the plan. That is also coming under the review. Now, what is this point is talking about? So we have defined the hypothesis. We are conducting the work procedures. The hypothesis is getting proved. We are able to collect the evidences. And now we know that tomorrow we are going to collect the evidences from particular site, from particular location, or from particular party. But suddenly that party destroyed that evidence at all. This is possible, right? Because this is all unstructured. Again, I'm saying that. So they know that now somebody will come, the forensic professional will come, then there will be a lot of questions. They will ask for the lot of documentations. So destroy that. Now what has happened? Now the evidences which we are looking for, those are destroyed. Or that is more possible in case of an electronic records, because there is a lot of volatility in the electronic records. So suddenly they will try to damage those electronic records. They may try to damage the backups. They may try to damage the servers. They may try to damage the storage area. So what we are thinking about, that we will get the evidences from that particular storage, from that particular server, or from that particular laptop, particular devices. Now that has been damaged. So what has happened here? The circumstances have changed. Or it may be also possible that we are planning to interview some of the stakeholders, participants, suppliers, vendors, etc. Initially, they have agreed to cooperate. But suddenly, when we went there and tried to put some questions, they denied to answer that. They denied to cooperate with us. Right? So what is happening here? Some circumstances are getting changed. In that situation, whether the evidences, again, we have to collect the evidences in that case also. But whether there is any alternatives to that through which we can collect the evidences, that review of our basic plan needs to be also done. And that is also part of our review. Right? What is the supervision that? Supervision means work procedures have been conducted as per the planning, as per our SOPs, right? Every forensic firm, every forensic accounting firm, they might have developed some sort of an SOP, standard operating procedures, to collect the evidences. That might have been trained their assistants, their team members, and according to that, whether the work procedures are getting conducted. Documentation, which we have differentiated in the earlier standard, difference between the documentation and the working papers, evidences and the documentation. So members, our team members are aware about that, and they are following our SOPs for preparation of the working papers. All that things needs to be supervised. Again, the timeline, periodicity of everybody, every forensic professional has to define as per the overall outline for the particular assignment, right? So that is elaborated in 350. In 360, this is very crucial, I can say, a standard, because every forensic professional has to appear for the testimony. I may say that in 90% of the cases, we are dealing with the financial disputes. If we are dealing with the fraud investigation, in 90% of the cases, we may have to appear with the agencies, competent authorities. Here we have defined it as a competent authorities for testimony. Right. Now, when we say that we have to appear before the competent, so who are the competent authorities? That is also defined in the standards. So competent authorities means the courts, the tribunals, or judicial entities, right? Or the investigating agencies who are having the judicial powers, or even the investigating agencies like the police. Why we have to appear for testifying with them? Because there are two things. One, they might have appointed us, right? That is one possibility. Second, they might not have appointed us, but we might have investigated the frauds, and now the criminal proceedings are going on. So they want some information. They want what is our outcome. They want our reports, and there could be some questions they may put in this testimony to us, right? So for that purpose, we may have to appear before these competent authorities. Now, the forensic professional has to understand that when we are appearing before a competent authority, in what role we are appearing there. Because there are two types of the witnesses. One, fact witnesses, another, expert witnesses. And now, if you look at your left-hand side in the last point, we have clarified for the standard that this 360 standard does not apply to expert witness testimony. Now, there is a basic reason for that. Because expert witness is having some support from the legal provisions. For example, in India, what is expert witness? That has been provided for in the Indian Evidence Act. So the expert witness will be governed as per the provisions in that specific law. That's why the standards deals only with the fact witnesses. Right? What is the fact witnesses? So here we might have been appointed by some of the investigating agencies. We might have been appointed by some particular company. And now the company might have initiated the legal proceedings, criminal proceedings, which is under the investigation with some investigating agencies, or in some cases, as a part of the criminal proceedings, we have to appear before the legal tribunal or before the court of law. Now, how to appear before that? So first we have to understand here that we are appearing there as a fact witness. We have to elaborate, we have to answer the questions related to our investigation, related to the work procedures we have followed. Even in this case, they may put a question to you saying that, asking that, what about the compliance of these standards also? That is also one of the possibilities. Right? So all these things we have to keep in mind. Now, here also we have to, when we are appearing for this testimony as a fact witness, we don't have to forget our basic principles. The independent, objective in approach, right? There should not be any conflict of interest. If there is any conflict of interest, that needs to be brought out in a transparent manner. Correct. So all these basic principles will equally be kept in mind when we are appearing as a fact witnesses. Now, when there will be the questions, there will be a lot of questions. The forensic professional shall keep in mind that whatever be the questions, and when we are answering to those questions, we should keep keep in mind that we are answering on the basis of facts and on the basis of evidences which we have collected during our assignment. We should not cross that limit. And that's why before appearing for these fact witnesses, our study, our basic work. We can say that that is a groundwork that needs to be perfect before going for this testimony. Second thing, again, we have to keep in mind the statutory provisions, the laws under which this testimony will be governed. There could be criminal proceedings related law. There could be judicial authority related law, right? So when we are appearing before that competent authority, we have to first check it with ourselves under which law, under which provisions of that particular law. There might be a possibility that these questions and answers or the testimony will go, and that all the provisions, 11 provisions, we should know. If we don't know, we can take always the help of the legal experts, right? But our study, our homework for our assignment, because only our homework, our study, from which we are gathering all the facts, whatever the evidences we are discovered or collected related to that facts, we have to limit the testimony, or we have to answer according to those findings, not cross that limit. That we have to keep in mind. The next series is talking about specialized areas, right? Because frequently we are talking about that because of the combination, and as I said, that most of the business processes are configured with the digital domain. Most of the organizations, most of the companies are using some sort of an ERP or electronic kind of an mechanism to process their transactions. And because of the usage of this digital domain, there could be a number of transactions. The volume of the transactions could be a large. And to locate, to find out the fraudulent pattern or the fraudulent transactions, to trigger out, for which we have to collect the evidences, we may have to apply the data analytics kind of a procedure. And specifically, right now we are witnessing a lot of loan frauds, a lot of defaults in the loan repayments. That's why we have also covered that loans and borrowings as a specialized areas in this 400 series. Now let us take an overview of that. So use of the data analytics related techniques. As I said, because of the voluminous data, if we want to find out some pattern, let us say that there is a X sales bills which have been invoices which might have been prepared by the fraudsters. Now, how to identify on which day, on which date, what is the particular size of the amount within which, or the range with which they have played with. So you cannot go one by one. That is not possible. But if you collect the data of all the sales or the invoice related transactions, and if you apply some sort of an formulas there, either you can use the Excel sheet or you can use any other tool for the data analytics purpose, then you will find out some patterns, some irregularities or some inconsistent activities from which you will be able to collect those transactions. Now, only collection of those transactions by using some data analytics related to is not an evidence, but those will guide you, those will give the indication, those will be the fraud risk indicators, those will be the red flags for which you will have to collect the evidences. Right. So here we are using this data analytics works, which will support our hypothesis, which will support our objectives. And when we say that we have to use that particular data analytics related tools or data analysis to find out those inconsistencies, to find out those irregularities, we have to prepare the data analysis plan. Data analysis plan needs to be correlated, needs to be prepared again according to our overall objective. Depending upon overall objective, there will be hypothesis, and our data analysis plan will be based upon our hypothesis. How it links? So there is a ghost employee related fraud. So how to identify the ghost employees? How to find out the irregularities related to the total employees for which the payroll is generated? And suppose that this is a multinational companies where the thousands or 5,000 type of the employees are working. So it is not possible to go one by one. So then what is our objective? Here our objective is that there are some elements which we can catch from this data analysis to find out the ghost employees. That is our overall objective. Accordingly, we have to prepare the data analysis plan. Now, what the data analysis plan is talking about? So data analysis plan is talking about how we are going to acquire the data. Now, who will give us the data of all the employees for which the payroll is going to be processed? Who is going to give us? Then whatever the data, it could be in the storage, it could be in the digital domain, then we have to generate that, we have to collect, prepare some sort of tools. So that is our data acquisition plan. How to acquire that in the digital domain? That is again clarified in 420. Now, whatever the data which we have obtained for this data analysis, we have to validate that. Otherwise, whatever the data which is given, that may not at all be useful, or that is not at all useful for our part of an assignment. So we have to validate that whatever the data is given, that is related with our objective, that is valid data of this organization. We have to prepare the data. We have to find out some of the relevant fields. We have to eliminate some of the fields out of that data. And we have to prepare the data ready for the analysis, right? And then we have to also decide that in this case of an ghost employees case, right, payroll related frauds, what is the data boundary? What is the periodicity for which we are going to collect that data, whether it is for 10 years, 5 years, 3 years, 2 years, 1 year. Otherwise, there would be huge volume of the data and we may indulge only in the data analysis. Nothing will come out within the predefined time. So data boundary is again very, very essential to be considered as per the considering the periodicity of the fraud, the modus operandi of the fraud. Again, when we do the data analysis, I have already told you that it should be in the line with the overall objectives and the hypothesis that I have given you the example. And then in what format actually we are getting the results of that. One thing which we have to keep in mind here, again, that is important from the law point of view, because when we are submitting all these data as a part of the evidences, because in the court of law, there could be questions, how you identified these ghost employees, how you located them. So we may probably give the results, we may give probably the answer that we have carried out the data analysis, and you will submit this data analysis which you have carried out. But here we have to ensure that when we are going to submit, because this data analysis will become now the electronic evidences. And whenever we are submitting as an electronic evidences, always the court requires a test of reproducibility. What is the test of reproducibility? So whatever the results which is coming out of that data analysis, if the court will apply the same techniques, the same tools, not through us, but by some other expert, the results would be the same. Right? So that, considering that possibility, we have to analyze and we have to keep all the details as a part of the working procedure, as a part of the documentation, so that we should be confidently going to tell to the court of law that yes, this whatever the plan we have prepared for the data analysis, it is having the capacity of the test of reproducibility. So anybody else, now we have done this, but if third party will come and analyze the data in the fashion with which we have done, it will give us the same results. So they will also be able to locate those ghost employees. Right. So these are the important points with which we have to do this data analysis kind of an tools or technology for collection of the evidences. Now, 420 talks about the collection of the evidence in the digital domain. Not naturally in practical language, we call it as a digital forensic. Right. So when we are gathering the evidences in the digital domain, we may have to use various tools, various technology. But before that, we need to understand the overall information system architecture of that organization. What does this mean? Point number 2, I'm talking here about the point number 2, undertake the overall understanding of the prevalent information system environment. What does this mean? When we are talking about collection of the evidences in the digital domain, in the computerized environment, there could be multiple possibilities. First, simply the data which we are looking out is available in the laptop. That is also possible. Data which is available could be available in the servers. Data which we are looking for is available in a separate storage area at the data center, which is centralized at somewhere, and which could be have been possibility of outsourced or co-located, or the possibilities that data is there in the cloud. So these are the possibilities. And that's why when we are going for the discovery of the evidence or collection of the evidence in this digital world, first we need to understand what are the architecture, how the business processes are configured in the information system, in the information technology. Because even when we say that the company is using the ERP itself could be on the ownership basis, the ERP could be on the ASP basis, the ERP could be in the cloud basis, and the IT architectures could be different. The data logs, whatever we are looking for, audit trails, whatever we're looking for, that may not be readily available on the laptops or on any devices, but that have been stored in the cloud or at the central location. So all that things we need to understand, and that's why this important stage in the digital discovery of evidences in the digital domain is to understand the IT architecture. Now, when we are gathering the evidences, I'm repeating it again that the gathering the evidences in the digital domain is very sensitive task. Why it is sensitive? Because the data is very, very volatile. You never know what type of digital evidences you are calling for. It is not necessarily be the books of accounts. Yes, books of accounts could be one of the part which is getting maintained in the electronic format. That is one part. But some fraud cases you may require the access logs. In some cases, to support the access logs, you may require the network logs. In some cases, you may require the system logs. You may require the evidences from the RAM, memory, and all this is having its own features of the volatility. And why it is, I'm tracing more importance on the volatility, because it is very easy to tamper those evidences if we do not handle that carefully. So when we are collecting the evidences, suppose we are collecting the evidences about the memory. We are finding out some file is there, which might have been deleted, but we may get some sort of an evidences related to that in the memory, in the page files, which is highly volatile. So how to capture those memory? Because that would be the live forensic, right? So how to capture in the live forensic? Because in the live forensic, in the digital domain, there is always a possibility that to tamper the evidently value of a particular record. And that's why it is the specialization to collect or gathered evidence is more required in this digital domain. So the forensic professional has to assess that whether the forensic professional is having that requisite skill set, expertise. Otherwise, of course, they can hire the services of expert. Now, when electronic evidences we are submitting, evidences which we have gathered in the digital domains, we cannot readily say and go to that and submit to the board. Again, every country is having their own specific laws, or their Evidence Act might have been updated, having the provisions how to submit the electronic evidences. And basic tests are that reproducibility, possibility of the tampering, then the procedure, the tools which we have used, the certification related to that, compliances of the data privacy laws. So all these things one has to keep in mind while gathering the evidences. And for that purpose, we have to keep in mind the requisite skill set is with us. Again, whatever but the forensic tools, because we are using number of tools for collecting the evidences. When we are gathering the evidences of the storage, when we are gathering the evidences of the memory, when we are analyzing, we may use the volatility framework. So there are different tools which are available. So how the tools are getting used, what is the authenticity of that tools, and basic importance is there related to the chain of custody or the chain of evidences. So whatever we are doing as a part of the gathering of the evidence in the digital domain, we have to keep the record of that, handling of the evidences of that, hash value and all those algorithms we have to keep in mind. So all these things we have elaborated in these 420 standards. As I said, because of the trend, the recent trend with the loan defaults and the loan frauds are coming up, there was a high demand that there should be some specific standards related to the loans and borrowings. But I would like to say here that we have not limited the scope of loans and borrowings only to the loans and borrowings taken from the banks or from the financial institutions. It is not like that. What is the unique point? What is the uniqueness of this standard is that it is not this loans and borrowings related standard is not only covering up the aspects related to the frauds of banking loans or the financial institutions related loans. It's not like that. Here in these loans and borrowings, we have enlarged the scope of the loans and borrowings so as to cover even the money which some organization, some company might have been collected as a part of the share capital for various types of the share capital. Even the personal borrowings, the unsecured loans given to the companies, or even by way of deposits. In India, some companies are allowed to accept the deposits. Even the money which is generated by calling up for the deposit purposes. So all that type of loans and borrowings we have covered as a scope of these standards. Why it is so? Because not only when we say that there is a loan fraud or the borrowing related fraud, there could be misutilization of funds which have been collected as a share capital or as a debentures or as a deposit. Because when they declare why they are collecting the share capital, why they are collecting the debentures amount, why they are collecting the deposit amounts, there is a specific purpose given for that. But if these money which they have collected, if they are not using it for the purpose which they are disclosed, we are calling it as a misutilization of the funds. In practical language, we can call it as a siphoning of the funds or the diversification of the funds. So the disputes arises when the contractual obligations, because contractual obligation says that okay, when you are generating the money, when you are submitting the proposal for the loans and borrowings, you are giving some purposes for it. It could be business purposes. When you are collecting the money under the name of the share capital, you are telling to the large amount of the stakeholders that this is going to be used for particular expansion, particular part of the business processes. So you are giving that commitment as a contractual obligation. But if you are not utilizing for that purposes, then these disputes will be arise. There could be again issues related to the legal and regulatory or contractual requirement. Because if we are talking about the bank loans, if you are talking about the financial institution related loan, every country might be having a regulatory framework one of the regulators, which may be giving the guidance how to disburse the loan, how to keep the monitoring of the loans amount disbursed, how to collect the security, how to handle the security matter. So there could be n number of regulatory provisions with which the banks or the non-banking financial institutions or any other financial institutions, they may have some regulatory framework with which they have to make the compliance and they have to take a follow. So there could be non-compliances related to that also. In most of the cases related to the loans and borrowings, as a forensic professional, we have to find out the asset trail or the money trail. Because when we say that the loans or borrowings amount has not been utilized for the purpose, that means misutilized, that means they have gone for some creation of other assets or they are totally invisible. They are not traceable at all. So we have to find out either the asset trail or the money trail. In the standards, we have given some of the examples, what kind of disputes possibly which will be there for the forensic professional. So it could be the loan which have been obtained through the inappropriate or by unethical means, by submitting some forged documents, fake documents. Then the security offered against that loans are not owned, the ownership is not with that particular borrowers, or that security is not at all in existence. Funds have not been used for as per the contractual obligation. So whatever be the possibilities or disputes, all those illustrations, I'm not saying that it is all inclusive, but some of the examples of these disputes we have given as a part of these 430 standards. Now, the two standards, I hope I'm within the time able to complete. I think Sampurna, there are still 10 minutes to go. So I think I will be able to complete that. Is it okay?
Yes, sir. No problems. We can take doubt sessions after you finish this.
Yeah. So last two standards I'm going to discuss. So the 500 series standards, which is important one, is about the report, forensic assignment related report. Now see, there are a lot of expectations from the appointing agencies about these reports. In the audit assignments, the reporting format, the structure of the report is prescribed, or that is already in existence. What is the format? That could have been defined by particular law or by particular regulator. But in case of a forensic, there is no prescribed format under any law. Right? That one point we have to keep in mind. So what we have to do with that, I think as a part of the 250 communication with the stakeholders, when we are accepting the engagement, we need to confirm with the stakeholders in what format, in what structure the report is expected. Right? And that we have covered in this bullet point number 3. Since there is no fixed format, we need to discuss this issue with our stakeholders, appointing agency, in what format they are expecting the report. We have to confirm that. Now, in the report, as I said, there are a lot of expectation that the agencies which are appointing, they may say that, okay, now you find out who are the culprits, XYZ is the culprit, you name that, you say that he is the fraudster, something like that. But all of us, we know that forensic professional is not there to pass any judgment about the guilt or innocence. And that is what we have pointed out in the bullet point number 6, if you can see. The report shall not express an opinion or pass any judgment or guilt on innocence. But what we can say that yes, we have investigated this disputed transaction. We have evidences when we did the money trail or the asset trail. And we have an evidences where we can say that the money is transferred from A's account to B's account, B's account to C's account. That we can say. And that is on the basis of evidences if we are having. That we can definitely say. But because of that, we may not say that whether A is guilty or B is innocent, nothing like that. That is one part. Second part, we have to keep in mind that in the forensic assignment are conclusion driven. It is not opinion based. In the audit, we express the opinion, but in forensic, we have to give the conclusion. Conclusion on the basis of our evidences, on the facts. So we should not exaggerate the facts, right? And we should not underestimate anything. So whatever be the facts, objectively we have to include in that report. That conclusion should be based on our evidences. Now, it may be possible that there could be some compulsion, there could be some restrictions, there could be some limitations, because of which some of the evidences we may not able to gather. Right. As I have previously mentioned that the suppliers or vendors at the initial stage, they were ready to give the interview, but subsequently they denied. So some of the information, some of the evidences which we are looking for to gather from those suppliers, from those vendors, we are not able to gather it. So that could be our limitations. Sometimes it may be possible that because of the destruction of the evidences, we may not able to collect those evidences and we may not able to conclude because of absence of those evidences. So whatever be the limitations, whatever be the restrictions, sometimes it could be the risk to our life kind of a threat. In that case, it may not be possible to enter into certain areas, collect those evidences. So that could be the restriction, right? So all these restrictions, all these limitations, and because of that, whether we are able to conclude or not able to conclude on certain parts of the objectives of the assignments, all these things need to be included in the report. Now here, when we are talking about the report, we are talking about the final written report, because it may be possible that if the assignment is of a longer duration, then the appointing agency may expect us to give us the status report. So what is the status of this current assignment? So generally we are calling that as the status report. But the standard is not dealing with that status kind of a report. It is talking about the final report, final written formal report. Now, what will happen because of certain unforeseen or unavoidable reasons? As I said, because nobody is ready to cooperate with us. We are not able to generate any kind of an evidence. It may be possible. Or some major evidences we are not able to collect because of anything. In that case, it may be possible that we are not able to complete the assignment. That is also one of the possibilities. But even in that case, we have to submit a formal written report stating what are the circumstances, what are the reasons, which are those unforeseen, unavoidable incidences because of which we have to stop this performance of the assignments. So all these things will be necessarily be reported. Another things which we have to consider, that even though there is no structured format for the forensic reports, there must be some key elements which we have to include as a part of our report. Which are those key elements? So first, we have to give some title, and we have to address it to our primary stakeholders, who is our appointing agency. Or at the time of appointment, we have to confirm that to whom the report needs to be addressed. And accordingly, the report needs to be addressed. Also, at the time of the appointment, we have to confirm with our primary stakeholders to whom the copies of the reports to be distributed. Right? At the first stage, it may be possible that we have to submit the report only to the appointing agency, but subsequently we may have to submit it to the other authorities. With the pre-intimation and pre-approval of the primary stakeholders, we have to forward those reports, copies of the reports to the other competent authorities. But all these things needs to be defined as per the standards 250 with the communication with the stakeholders. In the report, of course, we have to give about the scope and objectives of the assignment, which we have finalized in our engagement letter. Then we have to give our work methodology, how we have planned, what are our procedures, what would be the hypothesis, and what actions we have taken for the gathering of the evidences, work methodology, I can say. Even for the collection of the evidences in the digital domain, we might have used some expert. For analyzing the data, we might have used some expert. So their references, their outcome, all that could be part of your report. Also, here we have stated that we have to report that we have completed or performed this assignment as per these forensic accounting and investigation standards. In certain cases, it may be possible that some of the standards may not be complied with because the circumstances or the fraud situation was so that we were not able to comply with certain standards. But in that case, we have to report why we are not able to comply with those standards or any differentiating point because of which we are not able to make the compliance of them. Of course, the list of findings, conclusions, which is supported again by the evidences, how the evidences were collected, source of the evidences, and other supporting matters. As I have already discussed, is there any limitations, restrictions, assumptions that needs to be put out in the report, and conclusions, overall conclusions drawn for the assignment. And not to forget that we have to give the executive summary of all the results covering the important aspects. So these are the key elements with which we have to submit the reports. And the last standards, which is talking about the quality control. Quality is such a thing that we have to evaluate our every performance, every assignment. And we all know that there is always a scope to improve for the next assignment, right? And that's why when we are talking about the quality control, we are talking about the quality of each assignment and quality of the forensic engagement of all the forensic, quality of all the forensic engagement as a specialized forensic services area. So there are two parts of this quality evaluation. One, the quality of performance of each engagement or assignment, that is one quality control. And second, if we are created a specialized area as a forensic services in our firm, the quality, overall quality of that services, considering all types of the engagements. And that's why there should be a quality control system in our firm. Who should do the quality evaluation? Quality control evaluation, of course, the expert or the partner or the professional who is not part of this engagement, because that should be unbiased. And for that purpose, quality control procedures, quality control systems, quality control mechanism needs to be set up. SOPs for that needs to be defined within the accounting. We have to ensure that as a part of the quality control mechanism, that whether the for each and individual assignment, the technical and experienced staff with having the appropriate skill sets were appointed, they perform as per the quality norms, right? Is there any shortcomings which we noticed in their skill set? How to improve their skill sets? Overall, the competency of the firm to go ahead with this specialized area. And of course, there is always a need to improve on the quality side. And that's why when we assess some of the areas in which we are lacking, then what we have to do as a part of the quality improvement, we have to go for the continuous professional education, the training part of that. And that's why in point number 5, you can see here that as a part of the quality improvement, it is suggested that professional, because every professional has to mandatorily be attend some of the CP hours, continuing professional education hours. So if you are specializing in the forensic area, so here it is suggested that whatever be the mandatory hours you have to attend for the CPA purposes, 40% out of that hours should be dedicated to our forensic specialization. So you have to keep attending the training session, workshops, seminars which are related to the forensic areas, so that you can assess as a part of the quality control system. You might have assessed your weaknesses, you might have assessed your lacking of the skill set or competence in certain areas. So you can attend those continuous professional educational related or training or workshop related hours, and you can develop the skill set or required competence in that case. So that is a continuous process, right? And that's what we have come out in this 610 as a quality control standards. So friends, all these what I wanted to share with you. I hope I tried to complete that within the prescribed time limit. Just it is 3:09. Now Sampurna, I think we can take the questions or answers if they are.
Yes, sir. Yes. We will start with the question and answer session. So the very first question that came was FAIS 110 states that nature of engagements can be of forensic accounting, investigation, or litigation support. In litigation support, where a fraud examiner is appointed by the court as expert witness, in that case, he should include his opinion about technical matter or truthfulness of the case in the report. So expert opinion can be a part of that report. Need to know your opinion.
Yes, the question is rightly itself answering the things that when we are getting appointed by the court as an expert, okay, so expert opinion is treated as an evidence in the court of law, right? And that is again, of course, every country is having their own evidence act, but as far as India is concerned, in India, the expert opinion is considered as a evidence, as a part of the evidence. But for that purpose, there is elaborative section in that Indian Evidence Act which says that the court appoints the expert, in what matters they will appoint the expert, how to distribute the reports, right? And certain things, again, as a part of their report, they will have to deal with the technological things, they will have to do with the operational related matters, all that will be the part of their reports. Only thing is that to whom the report needs to be addressed. Of course, since the court is appointing us, the report needs to be addressed to the court. That is first part. And the report needs to be available to all the parties to the disputes. That is the second part. And the expert witness has to appear in the witness box for the testimony purposes. So there he will have to disclose his work procedures. And in that case, he has to, and again, do a lot of study about that particular assignment. But now the question is that whether that is a part of the FAIS. That is the second part of the question. So as I have stated in the 300 series that we have not dealt that expert witness as a part of the FAIS. And the reason is that because the expert witness is governed by the specific law. So law will always supersede about any of the standards. And every country is having their own regulatory provisions, legal provisions about this expert kind of an opinion. So that will be governed by that particular legal provision. And that's why we are not included as a part of this FAIS. But definitely we are thinking about issuance of a technical guide or something like that. But at present, we are not considered this as a part of the FAIS.
Okay, sir. Moving on to the next question. We have, is prediction similar to hypothesis, which needs to be proved / disapproved whether fraud has occurred or not occurred without bias?
Yeah, I think as a part of the brainstorming, as a part of the hypothesis forming, that is quite possible, right? And those things are also needs to be proved or disproved, right? And that is what I have covered in the work procedure, that you have to put all these predications, all these hypotheses to the test. And if during your work procedure, if you find that the evidences are available, then you can decide about the prove or disprove status of that particular case.
Okay, sir. The next question is, we know forensic accountant should ensure reliability and integrity of information. Do you think it is possible in all cases to ensure reliability of information is not available in books of accounts? What should be the procedure of reporting?
So reliability and integrity, if you are having any doubt about the reliability and integrity about any of the documents, about any of the evidences, the next thing you have to do about that, whether is there any corroborating evidences which are available, which will support your whatever the documents you are gathering about, where you don't have any confidence about the reliability and the integrity. But in that case, when you are having decided that there is no reliability, there is no integrity of the documentation, or that itself in a doubt, then I think you'll have to test that as per the country specific evidence act. And if it is a doubtful case, then in that case, you may have to look out for other types of the evidences, which will be more comfortable for the acceptability in the court of law.
Okay, sir. So now the next question is quite detailed, so I'll summarize it up. They have quoted a few sections from IBC, section 43 preferential transactions, 45 undervalue transactions, 50 extortion transactions, and 66 fraudulent transactions. So they are asking, is the above nature of, so basically they are asking, it may please be noted that although the auditors are free to select any transaction for audit within the scope of the above four sections of IBC, but they are required to place special focus on the transactions for the last prior 2 years. Is above nature of assignment of forensic accounting assignment or investigation on litigation support under FAIS 110?
See, when we are saying that is the appointment is under the specific section of specific law, as they have pointed out that this appointment will be governed by the specific provision under the IBC law, right? So when there is a law which gives a detailed provisions about the periodicity, about the coverage, and the resolution professionals, they have a right to decide about the selection of the transactions, right? So that is all governed by the specific legal provisions. So in that case, FAIS is well saying that you will have to go by that specific provisions of the law. So there is no conflict. It clearly says that you will have to follow whatever is the legal provisions are there.
Okay. So what exactly and where investigation and FA overlap?
Sorry, can you please repeat that?
What exactly and where investigation and FA, yani financial forensic accounting overlap?
Okay, so you can say that forensic accounting is basically concentrating about the asset trail or the monetary trail, right? Fraud investigation includes that also. So overlapping is there in the asset tracing or the monetary tracing. In that case, both the things could be overlap. That is a particular area.
Okay. So one last question. Observing principle of natural justice, since forensic assignment precludes making any financial finding of guilty and fixing responsibility, is it necessary to comply with this principle, as it is essentially observed by appointing authority who intends to take action against the forensic report?
See, here he is talking about, I think the question is related to principle of natural justice. Am I right?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So in case of a natural justice, what the natural justice is, we have to give the opportunity to everybody to, when we are collecting the evidences or when we are gathering the evidences, right? So in that case, as a part of our work procedure, I have explained you about the documentation. When I was explaining about the difference between the evidence and the documentation, which when I'm talking about the documentation, it is I'm talking about the working papers. So the part of the working papers, if you prepare, which will give us sufficient evidence. Now here by evidence, I'm talking about evidences related to your compliance with the principle of natural justice. So when you are communicating with a particular person or party to the disputes, and you are giving them enough opportunity, and all this documentation is part of your working procedure, which will sufficiently give us a say that you are following the principle of a natural justice. But what is the strong compliance which we have to demonstrate, that whether you have given your working papers having the detailed documentations about you have followed that particular principle or not. So documentation, demonstrating the documentation about following the principles, when there could be an allegation that you are not given enough opportunity and all that things will come up. But you'll have to demonstrate that we have sent various communication requests by email or by any other sort of an communication methodology. So that documentation will demonstrate, and that will be ultimately considered to prove or disprove whether you have followed or made a compliance of that particular principle of natural justice or not.
Okay, sir. So with this, I think all the relevant questions have been answered, and so here we are at the end of this enriching session, and I, CA Sampoon Sharma, would like to thank CA Dr. Debashish Mitra ji, President ICAI, CA HM Hayanke Bandara ji, President SAFA, CA Nihar and Jambusaria ji, Vice President SAFA, CA Aniket Sunil Talati ji, Vice President ICAI, CA CS Nanda sir, Chairman Digital Accounting and Assurance Board ICAI, CA Dayanivas Sharma ji, Vice Chairman Digital Accounting and Assurance Board ICAI, and our eminent speakers, Mr. Harsh Dua and CA Uday Vaman Rao Kulkarni sir. Thank you. Thank you for all your efforts and time to come to this VCM and provide the knowledge light to everyone on this topic. I need to mention my deepest sense of regards. I also extend my thanks to all the members who have joined on this enormous cooperation on this event. And last but not the least, I would like to thank the staff who had made this event possible. We, the DAB will keep organizing more and more sessions like this every Friday. So you are requested to stay in touch and be updated for the same. And with this, sir, I think we should conclude this session. It was wonderful hearing from you. And thank you.
Thank you very much, everybody.